Welcome back to another episode of the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by FanDuel, part of the Believe Network. Happy Friday, ladies and gentlemen, and you guys know what that means. It's free-for-all mailbag time, but
what
we get
is
there,
good, everybody? I'm ready to go. I always been fired up when I miss a show, Trev, like when I have you guys do a show. I love it because I get a lot of work done, but man, it makes me fired up when I finally get back to the show. So I'm a little fired up. Trev had this real professional intro ready to go, and I couldn't help myself. I'm so excited about today.
Well, hey, man, it's good to have you back on the show. We are previewing, before we dive into the Friday Free-For-All Mailbag, we are previewing Notre Dame's final regular season opponent, which they'll be facing on the road, the Stanford Cardinal. Now, I believe there is no kickoff time yet for this game. I think it's still up in the air.
They're going to wait to see how bad Stanford is before they set the time for that game.
Yeah, and if that's the case, they may set the kickoff time on November 28th. We'll find out.
Well, part of it is going to be how good Notre Dame is too. If it's a game where Notre Dame, we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, we're going to have a great mailbag today. But yeah, Trev, like you said, we're going to finish our opponent preview series and talk about Stanford Cardinal and what an it's kind of they're last because they're just the last team on the schedule. We win in order of games played, but there'd be a lot of reasons to explain them being last. The most unique offseason, perhaps the worst team on your schedule, a whole lot of different reasons you could maybe have Stanford last, but going to be fun to discuss the Cardinal today. Well, I shouldn't say fun. It's going to be interesting discussing the Cardinal today.
It'll be something that we do, discuss the Stanford Cardinal today, but you're not wrong, Brian. This has been probably under the radar, a little bit more on Notre Dame fans' radars because Notre Dame plays them at the end of the regular season, but under the radar of nationally of one of the most interesting off seasons that a program has had in college football. I mean, you go back and you look at, timeline of what's gone on with this school, and they've kind of been through the ringer. They hired Andrew Luck as the new general manager on November 30th of last year. And then March, stuff really started to pick up for them. They let go of head coach Troy Taylor on March 25th of this year. It took him about 6 days to find his replacement. They hired Frank Reich as the interim head coach on March 31st. At that point in time, they promoted current tight ends coach Nate Byam to offensive coordinator. Their defensive coordinator remains the same. And then recently, they hired John Donahue, former Nike CEO, as their athletic director on July 31st. So jam-packed offseason for the Stanford Cardinal, Brian. Definitely busy.
In a strange offseason, because in some ways, Trevor, you look at Stanford and say, boy, this just doesn't seem to be like a program, a school that cares about football success. But then there's some other things you look at this offseason and say, is this evidence that Stanford is making changes to say, hey, look, if we're going to have football, we better be good at it and we better, try to make some money off of it. And obviously bringing Andrew Luck back, I think, was step one of, does Andrew Luck take this job if it's just like, hey, man, let's manage our decline? We're not going to win. We're not going to do this. We're not going to do that. I don't think that's something that Andrew Luck would. I mean, it appears that this is a permanent position for him. This isn't like, hey, man, come in for a year, help us out and leave, kind of like which is what Frank Reich is doing. But I think that's obviously that I would assume, this is me reading between the lines. This isn't me telling you something that I know or intel or behind the scenes, but I'd be hard pressed to believe that Andrew Luck would be coming back and without some sort of assurances that, hey, we're going to be more committed to football. We're going to do this, we're going to do that. And those type of things. And so I have to believe that was the case. And then of course, the firing of their head coach, which was a very weird situation. They bring in Frank Reich, who has an interesting relationship with Andrew Luck. Obviously, he coached him for Frank Reich's first year as the head coach of the Colts. Was Andrew Luck's last year as an NFL quarterback. It would be the 2018 season before injuries derailed his career. So that was an interesting hire. It was clearly a get us through the offseason or get us through this season. It's too late to go hire a permanent coach, but if Frank Reich does well, maybe he decides to keep the job, or maybe he decides he wants to stay in college football. So who knows how that's going to go? But just so much uncertainty and turmoil. And then they finally hired the athletic director. I think this is the move, Trevor, to me, that makes me think that Stanford football might be something that they prioritize to a degree. And then there's one other thing that you and I are going to talk about when we actually get into the roster breakdown. But they hired a businessman, not a guy that's really in athletics from the standpoint of he's been an AD, he's been a coach, he's been some administrative AD, something along those lines. This is a guy from the business world. Now, part of he's been at different companies, but a lot of his experience is working with sports. Obviously, if you're working at Nike, if you're higher up at Nike, sports is a big part of what you're appealing to. That tells me that Stanford is saying, hey, look, we have to embrace the new reality. If we're going to play Division I football, we have to pay $20.5 million in revenue. So we can't just, we're in the ACC. We're not getting a huge TV deal from the ACC. So we're going to have to do some things to raise more money. And so I think part of this is bringing in a businessman who can implement some strategies to make them more profitable. That's obviously step number one for you hiring a business person. There's obviously going to be some fundraising involved in this conversation that you think will help. But I also think that combine that with the Andrew Luck move, they do strike me as potential evidence that Stanford understands that being good at football is also something that's very important to creating revenue. And so we'll see if they can live that out. But so far, Trev, there's a lot of question marks surrounding the future of the Stanford program. And, obviously the Pac-12 blowing up was, I think them and Cal suffered more than anybody else because they didn't have homes. And really, a lot of them having a home has to do with Notre Dame and Jack Swarbrick and his connections and things that he did. But they're in a tough spot, Trev, because you've got one opponent in your region. You play them at their place every other year. So it's not like you've got that guaranteed one West Coast game every year. And they've got to travel real far away for a lot of their games. And it's a tough situation. And obviously with the coach leaving, and they lost a ton from their roster, and it wasn't a very good roster to begin with. These guys are stepping into a really tough situation. Really tough.
Yeah, big picture, I love the moves. I love the fact that they brought in Andrew Luck. I like their decision for athletic director. I even like the interim head coach decision with Frank Reich. You're getting a guy with NFL head coaching experience to come in and take over, really this kind of mess that he was left with after Troy Taylor was let go. But I do think that the dividends of these investments of Andrew Luck, Frank Reich, and Donahue are not going to start to really show itself until 2026 because of how scattered this was. During all of their hires and during not including players that left for the draft, Stanford lost 27 players to the transfer portal while all of that stuff was going on. And so this is going to be a completely new look roster. It's going to be a new looking team. There's been coaching shifts. And so this year, it's going to be really interesting to see how Andrew Luck and how Frank Reich manage this program this year, because, Brian, there is a lot on their plate right now. A lot.
There really is. And you don't know how they're going to handle it. You really don't. I mean, it's you look at their schedule, and we'll obviously take a deeper dive into it, but their road games are at Hawaii. That's not close. I know, like, if your knowledge of Hawaii is like what you see on a paper map, you're like, well, it's like kind of like here's California and Hawaii's right there. No, it's actually in reality way out there. Their other road games they play at BYU. Provo, Utah is not exactly close to them. They play at Virginia, at SMU. Dallas, Fort Worth is not close to Stanford, California. At Miami, there's literally not a further place they could go than Miami for a game. At North Carolina. Like, those are their road games. And it's like you said, Trev, they're in a really tough spot. One of the things that they're going to have to do, and I think this is very important for Stanford, is in future scheduling, they're going to need to try to get into more 7-5 situations just to save money from the cost of travel. And, I realize that might for a while force them into some tricky. Okay, our non-conference is pretty weak, but guys, you are so far away from being a national championship contender right now that shouldn't be your concern. Your concern should be rebuilding the program and scheduling some winnable home games against lower level G5 teams or even an FCS opponent or two is something I think they need to do to get wins, number one, but then also somehow cut down on their travel schedule and just the wear and tear for the players on the trips they have to make. Because Stanford didn't ask for this. This isn't like USC. This isn't like UCLA and Oregon and Washington, who I get so tired of them whining about their travel, or Penn State whining about having to go out there. Well, you voted to have those teams in your league. Stanford didn't ask for this. If Stanford had their way, there'd still be a Pac-12. So I have more sympathy for them than I do a lot of these other teams that were affected by the travel that they have to incur because of all the conference realignment, because they're not a team that necessarily asked for that. So, and then you look at this team this season, Trev, and the reality is they weren't very good last year. And, I liked the Troy Taylor hire. I did. I thought it was a good hire. I liked what he did at Sacramento State. I thought he did a good job building that program up. And the reality is that the improvement from year one to year two was minimal. There was improvement, and it may not look like it, but because you went 3-9 one year, 3-9 the next year. But I think when you look at Stanford in 2023, you had losses by 46 points. They lost by 7 points to Sacramento State, your head coach's former school at home. Lost by 1 point to Arizona. Okay, maybe they're going to be competitive. Then the wheels fell off. You lost by 36 to Oregon, 35 to UCLA, 9 to Washington at home, 45 to Oregon State, 12 to Cal, and then obviously lost by 33 to Notre Dame. And you look at the next year, and their points per game average only goes up 2.2. They dropped their points allowed average only by 4. They were a little bit more competitive, I would argue, this season, even though the final scores don't always show up. But they had a 7-point loss to TCU in what was a competitive game. They beat Syracuse on the road in a big win. They got blown out by Clemson. They got blown out by Virginia Tech, got blown out by Notre Dame, got blown out by SMU, and it's looking like same old Stanford. They lost 4 of their last 5 games, Trev, and one of them was a 31-point loss to NC State. But their other 3 losses to Wake Forest, Cal, and San Jose State were all by 3 points. And then they beat Louisville late in the year. So they at least battled more. They were more competitive down the stretch. But now that roster gets gutted in a lot of ways because of NFL departures and then obviously a bunch of guys transferring. And now you look at it and say, I don't know how they're going to handle that, because they just don't have, in my opinion, the kind of roster you need to really turn this thing around. So that's why I say you've got to have some realistic looks at yourself and say, we're a long way away. We've got to do things to lay a foundation. And it's kind of hard to do that when you've got a coach that's probably not going to be your coach for the future. And that makes it tough for players. Like, how are we going to be locked in when it's like, who am I playing for? I'm doing this for somebody else, or am I doing this to be, to look good in the portal? It's a tough situation for them to be in.
Yeah, it really is. And I know we're going to dive into it in a little bit, but their schedule this year doesn't make things that much easier. Comparatively, it's a little bit more favorable than what it was last year. You don't have a Clemson on the schedule. You still have Notre Dame on the schedule. But Stanford as a whole, I'm going to echo a lot of the same things that I said about Purdue. And honestly, it'll even be a little bit more tough than Purdue, because at least Purdue, when they hired the guy from UNLV, his name is escaping me right now.
Barry Odom.
Thank you. At least when Purdue hired Barry Odom, I said when we previewed Purdue, take wins and losses out of it, take margins of wins or margin of losses out of it. If you can establish some sort of team identity and some sort of culture, that's going to be a win for Purdue in year one under them, because they're coming off of such a horrific season. Brian, to your point, it's unclear what the future of Stanford holds right now with Frank Reich being an interim head coach. So it's even tough to say, well, as long as they can establish some sort of culture this year, because that culture may be leaving at the start of the 26 season or after the 25 season. So who knows? Mm-hmm. That's definitely going to be a question. But, you go back through and you look at what they did last season, it kind of makes sense why, FanDuel has them where they're at. FanDuel right now has Stanford. You mentioned earlier, you're kind of a long ways away. from winning a national championship. They're tied for dead last in FanDuel odds at plus 10,000 to win a national championship. They have the same odds as Texas State, James Madison, and Purdue. And they have even further odds somehow to win the ACC. They have the lowest odds to win the ACC in FanDuel, plus 30,000. They're tied with Wake Forest. The next closest team is California at plus 13,000. And so Stanford, what FanDuel is kind of telling us is that they're going to be in for a rough ride this season. But Brian, it still furthers your point. They're a long ways away. This is going to be the definition of what rebuilding looks like for a football program.
It is. D-Rock Irish has a great post he put. I says, most mileage for away college football games this year. Number one, Hawaii, who's almost always number one. 14,812. Number two, Stanford at 11,762. And number three is Oregon, 8,371. So they are almost 3,400 miles greater than any other Power 5 team in college football. And the only one that is more is a team who doesn't even whose home campus is not even connected to the continental United States. So it's rough. It's rough.
Yeah, it is. You talk about the losses that they had on offense and defense from the portal. I mean, they lost. You guys know some of the names. They lose Emmett Mosley. He's gone. He goes to Texas. They lose David Bailey. He goes to Texas Tech. Alik Ayumaner elected to go to the NFL early. He was their best wide receiver last year. And I've seen some clips of him in training camp. He's kind of been tearing it up for the Titans a little bit. Good route runner. Ismail Sissi, he's going to Arkansas. Notre Dame's going to be facing him later this year. They still have a handful of players that are still left in the portal. Ashton Daniels transferred to Auburn. And what, conversation for a different day, but what I thought was an interesting move, considering how much Auburn's trying to.
Is he playing quarterback for them this fall? Or is he like making the switch? Like, that would be interesting to see.
That would be interesting. But outside of that, they also lost a lot of their production in terms of like NFL talent that has also departed. So between the transfer portal and between players electing to go to the NFL draft, this team is going to look completely different. And to counter their 27 outgoing transfers, the one thing that Brian and I were talking about before the show is they were still bringing in transfer portal players, which is also somewhat of a good sign for the state of the union of the program, despite all the moves that are going on, despite an interim head coach, besides not having an athletic director until literally 8 days ago. They were still able to bring in 18 transfer portal players. So if you're looking at this from a glass half full standpoint, that is interesting.
That's my other thing that makes me think that there are some things happening at Stanford that maybe they're starting to somewhat soften their whole, hey, we're going to have to change things a little bit. And a lot of the portal guys, Trevor, from okay, they let a kid in from Wake Forest. That's a really good academic school. They let a kid in from Yale, let a kid from Yarmouth, another kid from Yale, a kid from Cal, a kid from Northwestern, a kid from Georgia Tech, a kid from another kid from Northwestern, and another kid from Yale. But they also let a kid in from South Carolina State, a kid in from Wisconsin, a kid in from Colorado, a kid in from Memphis, two kids from Washington, a kid from Eastern Washington, a kid from UCF, a kid from Oregon State, a kid from Texas Tech, a kid from Sacramento State, a kid from UCLA. So there's another player from Idaho, a kid from Northern Iowa. So there's plenty of kids that they brought in that aren't from your traditional, what you'd expect to transfer to Stanford. So it does give me a little bit of a thought that maybe they're willing to work with them a little bit more. But it's going to be interesting to see what they're going to do. But they're going to have to go through high school recruiting to rebuild. That's going to be the big thing, Trev. But like, you want to talk about evidence of the drop-off. Let's just go back and look at the Jim Harbaugh era when he really got that thing rolling. And after that 2009 season where they went 8-5, they had 3 players drafted in the NFL draft. The next year they had 4. They had 4 the next year, and all 4 were taken in the first or second round. 3 the next year. They had 6 the next season. 6 the next season after that, including a first-round pick, a second-round pick, and 3 third-round picks. They had 5 the next season, another first-round pick, 2 first-round picks in 2017. Only 2 players picked, but it was the number 3 and number 8 overall picks. 4 players in 2018 draft, 5 players in the 2019 draft, including a second, a third, and a fourth. 2 players in 2020, and then 5 players taken in 2021. The last 4 drafts, they've had 1, 5, 1, and 1 taken in the draft, and they haven't had a single player drafted higher than the 3rd round. And they only had one of those. Like it's been such a massive drop off. I mean, there was a period of time where, like I said, 2012, 2 first-round draft picks, 2 second-round draft picks, a second-round pick in 13, a second-round pick in 14, a first and a second in 15, a first and a third in 16, 2 firsts in 17, a second in 2019, a second in 2021. The drop-off in talent has been noticeable, and it was stark. And a lot of it was the school just wasn't willing to support the program they needed in the ways they needed to. They weren't willing to change with the times. They weren't willing to let them offer kids sooner. They weren't willing to let in early enrollees. They weren't willing to really engage in the transfer portal. And they're so far behind right now that if they're going to make changes, it has to happen quickly. Because the roster that we're looking at right now is, in my opinion, one of the 5 best rosters in the Power 5 level. And that's probably being a bit generous. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't give Notre Dame a game if you talk about previewing Notre Dame game, because it's not much worse than the roster that they had in 2022, but it is a bad roster. And when you combine that with all the other turmoil, it's going to be a long year in Stanford. This is not the year to evaluate whether or not they're turning the corners of program. This is a survive the year and then figure out what your next steps are. That's really what this season is going to be about for Stanford, Trevor. And we could break down the players in the team. And there's some things we like. I mean, they have one of the better tight ends on the schedule that Notre Dame is going to face this season. And Sam Roush, I believe he was my second team all-opponent tight end last year. The only reason he's not first or second team this year is because they play Justin Jolly and the kid from Boise State, who's a really good player. But he's a really good tight end. You and I have talked a lot last year about their running backs, and Micah Ford and Corey Davis Jr. are really good running backs. Cedric Irvin was a kid that was committed to Notre Dame for a while. They have a running back whose first name is Tuna on their team, and another running back whose name is Champ. So they definitely have a great all-name team there. Scotty Edwards is a good football player at safety. They've got a couple offensive linemen that are good players. There's some good players here, Trevor, including a couple defensive linemen that Notre Dame recruited. But overall, this is a unit that lacks speed and a unit that lacks playmaking ability. And it's just a roster that just doesn't have a lot to it. So that's going to be a struggle. You ready to go through their schedule and make some predictions, Trev?
I am ready.
All right. So let's go through it. I'm going to bring up their schedule. We'll do what we always do. Just quickly look at the schedule, and then we will make our prediction for the old Stanford Cardinal. Why don't you go ahead and kick it off, Trev?
Yep. All right. When I look at the schedule overall, I'm going to echo a lot of the similar conversations that I had when we brought up Syracuse's schedule. Look, there's at minimum 7 very losable games on this schedule. And so when I'm looking at a program like Stanford, a team like Stanford going into this season, I kind of look at the games that are winnable for them. On the road against Hawaii is doable. On the road against Virginia is doable. North Carolina, we talked about this yesterday. That is just such a wild card that I just don't know how their season is going to end up. Are they going to be one of those teams that they kind of get their feet under them and it's November and it's late in the year? And not saying they're a team that you just don't want to see, but I see North Carolina having the potential to be a much better team in November than they were in August. So that's going to be an interesting one to keep your eye out on. I think California could be a game. They don't benefit from having Wake Forest on the schedule, who, different outlets are consistently ranking Wake Forest and Stanford as the 2 bottom ACC teams this year.
And Cal's in part of that as well, yeah.
Yep. And so Cal, Wake Forest, and Stanford are kind of consistently the bottom 3 ACC teams this year in terms of, predicting where they're going to finish. As of right now, I have Stanford going 3-9. When I look at this schedule, I have them repeating what they did last year. But I don't think it's going to be, I don't want to call it as good looking of a 3-9 as last year, because 3-9 never really looks good. But to Brian's point earlier, 4 of their last 5 games were losses, but, they lose to Wake Forest by 3. They lose to Cal by 3. They lose to San Jose State by 3. I don't know if those games will be that close in losses, but I do have them going 3-9, but they're 9 losses aren't going to be close. And right now, that's where I have Stanford. If it helps, their over-under on FanDuel is also set at 3.5. So I guess I'd be taking the under.
I'd definitely take the under too, Trevor. I honestly, I don't know how they win more than 3 games, and I have them at 2-10. And I obviously at Hawaii is a winnable game. Look, there's several games that are winnable. They beat Louisville last year, and they beat Syracuse last year. That's a 9-win team and a 10-win team. So anything is possible. But they still only won 3 games last year with those 2 wins. But I don't think this team is as good as last year's team. Hawaii's winnable, but still going to be tough. I don't know that that's a win for them. BYU on the road should be a loss. Boston College at home is a winnable game, but that's not going to be an easy game. And if I had to pick today, I'd pick BC to win that game. At Virginia, I predict them to lose that game. I do have them beating San Jose State, but I don't feel great about that. I mean, San Jose State lost a lot, but you are going into year 2 of the Kenny and Matalolo era. So, how are they going to be in year 2? At SMU, that's going to be tough to be competitive. Home against Florida State. I know Florida State was terrible last year, but I don't think that Florida State's going to be as bad as they were last year. It's certainly possible of a win, but I think Florida State bounces back and becomes a bowl team. How will Florida State handle the travel? That's going to be a question that I have with them. It's going to be a question I have with Boston College. It's going to be a question I have with Pitt. When you look at this game, that's a big trip for them, much further than they're used to. At Miami, it's probably not going to be competitive. At North Carolina, maybe winnable, but I think North Carolina's got some talent. Then you're home against Pitt. So, and then home against Cal. The Cal game is winnable. Cal had a rough offseason as well. At one point, their entire backfield transferred this summer, it was actually after the spring. They lost some guys in the fall or in the winter, and then lost some more in the spring. Entire backfield left. There's some talent issues there as well, and Justin Wilcox is dealing with a school that doesn't really support the program the way it should either. So that's a winnable game. There's just not a lot of winnable games outside of them just pulling off some massive upset, which is certainly possible. Trev, they've gone 3-9 in each of the last 3 years. And actually, no, did they go 2-8 in 2022? Hold on real quick. Let me look up. Or 2022, they went 3-9. They've gone 3-9, 3-9, 3-9. They've been bad. But that's 9-27, correct? But they have beat Notre Dame. They beat Arizona State. They beat Colorado on the road. They beat Washington State on the road. They beat Syracuse on the road. They beat Louisville. Those are good wins. So they're a very weird team in that regard. But this is the last 3-9 teams, this roster, in my opinion, is worse than those teams. So I have them at 2-10, 3-9, certainly possible, but I actually think they take a bit of a step back this year. So that's my prediction for the old Stanford Cardinal, Trev.
We see them very much the same. Well, listen, folks, that's going to do it for our recap of Stanford. Going to do it for the overview of the Stanford Cardinal. Set up for a rough year, but again, it's Notre Dame's final opponent of the 2025 regular season. They play them on the road. Kickoff time yet to be determined. But don't go anywhere, guys. It is Friday. We have Friday Free-For-All Mailbag coming up. But before we get there, be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family, anybody that you know loves Notre Dame, college football as much as you do. But as always, the best way to support what we do here, you see it scrolling down there at the bottom of the screen. Subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Brian, it's Friday, and that means we have a Friday Free-For-All Mailbag today. Again, Irish Breakdown podcast brought to you by FanDuel, part of the Believe Network. We already have 52 awesome questions starred in here. Now, if this does happen to be your first mailbag, if you want your question or comment set aside, this is for the YouTube live chat. So if you want us to answer your question, put a little MB for mailbag or a little mailbox emoji. That lets Brian and I know to set that question aside. Sometimes we run out of time. You guys are filled with great questions. So if you want yours bumped to the top, you can always put in a super chat. We'll get those answered. And I believe, Brian, that is how we're getting today started off.
Yeah, we have a couple super chats to get us started here today. Start with Wade Garrett.
Wade, appreciate the super chat. Thank you very much. Gents, if you were the Notre Dame coaches, would you have a timeline in mind to name starters, regardless of position, to get ready for Miami? When would that be? If so, have a great weekend and go Irish.
So I'm not a big fan of arbitrary timelines for a decision, especially one about the quarterback, Trevor. And I would say I would set benchmarks. Like my first benchmark for me would like Notre Dame, I believe, has not had their first team scrimmage yet. And my real scrimmage. It looked like the one in the stadium looked like a scrimmage because of the way that the video portrayed it, which was not a knock on Notre Dame. They did a phenomenal. That video was really cool. I wish they'd show a little bit more of the plays, but whatever. That wasn't a scrimmage. That was just a normal practice. That was like team periods and things like that. And then they had some situational stuff. It was just a normal team period in a practice. It wasn't a scrimmage. I believe we'll see something like that this weekend. I'm not even thinking about making a decision until then, unless somebody has just tanked. And neither one of these kids are going to tank. I would say if you're talking about timelines or, benchmarks, I'm going to sit down with my staff if I'm Marcus Freeman after the scrimmage and say, okay, where are we? Is it still too close to call, or is somebody just kind of separated in fall camp? If they haven't separated, then I would probably say, okay, let's reconvene again next weekend and see if separation is starting to happen. But if no one's really seized hold of the job, honestly, my deadline is the weekend before they play Miami. That's not ideal. That's not the best case scenario for the team. But what's even worse than waiting too long to name a starter is naming the wrong starter. And I think that can create even bigger issues that go beyond week one. So my timeline is just when I know. But I would build in benchmarks, my first one coming this weekend after the scrimmage, where I'd sit down my staff and say, okay, let's assess where things are. Has somebody separated it enough to where maybe they're not named the starter, but this next couple days, we're going to give that guy all the 1 reps and this guy all the 2 reps to see how that guy that right now is the leader in the clubhouse handles I'm the one these next couple days. Now that he knows, okay, right now, you're number 1 on the depth chart. You've earned that spot. We're not naming you the starter, but you're going to take the 1 reps the next couple days. How does he handle that? And then how does the number 2 guy handle that? Does he all right, cool, let's do it. I got to step up my game. Or does he put his head down and pout? And then how does the number 1 guy handle that? Does he does he throw 8 picks the next day and throw nothing but checkdowns the next day because he's afraid to make a mistake because he's now the number 1 guy? Those are all part of the evaluation process. And I would not have an arbitrary deadline to decide it. My deadline is honestly when someone my timeline is when someone proves to me they're the guy. The only hard and fast deadline I would have is really we're going to sit down that after Friday of the week before the first game and make a decision. And hopefully by then somebody has separated, but I'm not forcing a deadline on it.
You and I see that very much the same. If I was forced to put a deadline on it and I was the coach, it would be by the week of game prep, because then you don't also want to have to balance getting one of CJ and Kenny ready to play Miami, and then you make your decision at some point that week. So we see that very similar.
Now that's a question referring to timeline. So, the chat said, our resident Ohio State fan said, Ryan Day said he wants to have a starter picked by the end of next week. I wouldn't be surprised if Marcus Freeman has a similar timeline. Again, I don't know that Marcus Freeman has a timeline in regard to we're going to make a decision by then. I do think that the statement that Archer made is what Marcus Freeman would prefer. And we talked about this before camp. You want to have a decision made by the end of the second week of camp. If you would not, you don't want to. You would hope that someone establish himself so that by the end of the second week of camp, you can make a decision. No later than that. In a perfect world, you come out of the scrimmage on this weekend and somebody's just like, all right, it's just kind of obvious right now. this guy was leading and now he's performed well in the scrimmage. But what if the guy that's been leading the whole time doesn't play well in the scrimmage? Well, now you're kind of in a tougher spot. So it's not so much about timelines. It's about, like I said, benchmarks. We'd like to do it here. We'll evaluate it. Are we ready? No, we're not ready. Okay, let's set the next timeline for when we're going to do that. And that's really what it comes to be. But the coaches would like a decision to be made sooner rather than later. That's the ideal scenario. But you just can't force it. And that's going to be the key for Notre Dame. And I don't think that they will. From the people I've talked to, they like I said, they have benchmarks. They have, let's evaluate things. But I've been told that there's not going to be a rush to make a decision arbitrarily. It's going to be about someone's going to have to win that job. This is a question relative to that one, so I want to bring this up now. It just got submitted, but it's relevant to what we're talking about.
From Jim Halloran, the players always know who should be starting. How much will Marcus Freeman seek out players and leaders' thoughts?
I first of all, I strongly disagree with that first statement. The players always know who should be starting. No, they don't. They absolutely do not. That's the reason they're the players and not the coaches, Jim, because they don't always know. There's a lot of there are certain players, like we heard from some guy, on our board, said that he knew somebody who knew a Notre Dame player, and he wanted Kenny Minchie because Kenny's more athletic. And I've heard from other people that say they want CJ to be starter because he's the better passer. Players have their biases and preferences, and they don't think of things like a coach. There may be guys who are closer with CJ than Kenny, or guys that are closer with Kenny than they are with CJ. There may be guys like, I like this guy because he throws me the ball more. Well, that's not really a gauge for who should be your starting quarterback for the entire team. So I don't think that the players know who should be starting. At the same time, I also believe that the coach should and will have conversation with the players he perceives to be the leaders in the team. Hey, how do you guys feel about this? Tell me your pros and cons of both quarterbacks. Who do you think has best control of the huddle? Who do you think has the whatever? I think those are valuable conversations to have. And those can be good. Like if you're sitting there like, dude, we are torn. We're torn on this. Like by all the metrics we've established for ourselves of how we're going to grade this thing, it's 50-50. So let's talk with our player leadership. And to a man, they're like, this guy leads us better. This guy's respect more. This guy's okay, then that might be where you go. But that's more of a tiebreaker situation than anything else. And Jim said, fair enough, but as a player, if someone is better than you. Again, not necessarily true. Sometimes that's true. I've said this before. When I was in high school, I thought I was a pretty good quarterback. And then I watched Ronald Curry play, and I realized I'm not that good. I'm not even close to being that good. But there's certainly play. Like when I started in college, I was in a quarterback battle my second year of college when I got moved back to quarterback. And I can promise you, I thought I was better than Ray D'Ambrosio. And I promise you that Ray D'Ambrosio thought he was better than me. Like neither of us were going to be like, you know what, that other guy's better than I am. Now, Ray and I were cool and we didn't have any issues, but like, I promise you, Ray thought he was better than me. And I thought I was better than Ray. I didn't know. There were players in the team that wanted me to start. There were players in the team that wanted Ray to start. That's always the case. If everybody in the team is a consensus around one player, you don't have a quarterback battle. You don't. I promise you there were players in the team last year that wanted Steve Angeli to start over Riley Leonard. They would have been wrong. But at the end of the day, you're the one getting paid the big bucks to make these decisions. And I don't think the players always know who should be starting. And I don't think players should always know who's better. I'll tell you another story. I love telling coaching stories. In 2002, I was a coach at Muhlenberg College. I had an All-American running back that year named Matt Bernardo. Great player. Over 1,300 yards, school record in touchdowns that year. Tremendous talent. Ended up being an honorable mention All-American that season. My number 2 running back, Mike Marker-Brad, tremendous player. Would have started for every team that we played. And so he was our number 2. We started doing some things with him at like fullback where we throwing the ball in the backfield because we just had to figure out a way to get him the ball. And I had a freshman named Mike McCurley who was a great player, like great talent, was our fastest running back as well. And I had a kid who's 4th team. I won't say his name. Really nice kid. Great kid. Didn't work hard. Wasn't super talented. But his dad would come up to me after every single game and wonder why his kid isn't playing. And I'd be like, did you not see the 45-0 beat down we just put off where our starting running back had 4 touchdowns? Like, and when I put in my 3rd string running back on his second carry, he housed it for 50 yards. Like, were we watching the same game? And his son genuinely thought he should have been playing. He wasn't even sniffing third team, much less starting. So no, players don't always know that they are that they're better. And Jim Halloran says, could the QB decision split the locker room? It could if you don't handle it right, but it doesn't often do that. And I don't have a fear of that being the case this year. From what I've been told from all my sources, player sources, parent sources, coaching sources, Kenny and CJ are both very respected by their teammates. And whoever wins the job will be respected by his teammates, even those who think the other guy should start.
Super chat from ND Milton fan. Appreciate the super chat. How much subjectivity is there for deciding a winner of the quarterback battle? Is it mainly data driven?
It can't only be data driven. It can't. It has to have some level of subjectivity, because, and then what data are we talking about? Well, there's some subjectivity to what data are you placing a premium on. So Trevor, you may say, hey, look, man, I'm a big completion percentage guy. And this guy completed 78% of his passes. This other guy completed 70. All right, cool, Trev. What was the yards per attempt for the guy that completed 78? 5.7. Okay, what was the completion percentage for the guy that completed 70? It was 9.2. Okay, why? Oh, this guy completed 78 because he did nothing but throw checkdowns and crossing routes and stuff like that. He never pushed the ball down the field. So, yeah, certain numbers of yours are going to be better. Your consistency from week to week or practice to practice at completing a higher level is going to be more impressive than the kid who maybe had a couple days where he threw more picks because he was trying to be more aggressive and feeling out and seeing what he could and couldn't get away with, which is what camp is for. The problem is you get media people that don't know anything about football, and they just look at interceptions and evaluate it like it's a game. It's not a game. It's a practice. And there's things that I want to see from my quarterback in practice that, hey, let's push the boundaries a little bit. And we have a great question about the difference between taking a chance and being reckless that we'll get to in a little bit, that I think is a great question. But there has to be, Nathan, some subjectivity to this. And to where it's just like, dude, I can't put my finger on it, but I just feel like this kid does this and this kid does that. And, when you talk about player feedback, the players, and you'll always seek player feedback, but there is almost always subjective. I doubt that if they ask Billy Schrouth, who do you think should start? He's going to be like, well, listen, Kenny's completing this number of passes and CJ's completing this number of passes, and their, points per drive in team is this, and they're, and so based on that data, coach, I think, no, he's going to be like, hey, I just feel like when this guy's in there, I feel like we move the ball better. There's always going to be some level of that in this decision, and that's okay. You just have to make sure that your subjectivity and your feelings don't also then overcome obvious data. Like if one guy, higher completion percentage, higher yards per attempt, more yards per completion, better touchdown interception ratio in practice. The one big thing for me when I'm evaluating is, what is my scoring percentage per drive with each team? So what was CJ's scoring percentage with the first team compared to Kenny's? What was CJ's scoring percentage per drive with the second team compared to Kenny's with the second team? So like if I go out on day one and let's say today's a CJ Carr with the first team day, and CJ's and Kenny's with the twos, and CJ has a better scoring percentage per drive than Kenny, I'm not evaluating those compared that day. I'm comparing what CJ did today to what Kenny will do tomorrow when he's with the first team the majority of the time. And then I will then compare Kenny's number twos with CJ's number twos. That's a big one for me. And so you've got to also make sure that your feelings don't trump, okay, this guy was better here, he's better here. There's literally no data that tells me this kid isn't better. So what are you going with? My gut. Well, that may not be the greatest thing, because that's when you start to get into, but I had a better relationship with this kid. I remember the promise I made to his mom that I'd take care of him. And you can, that's when you can maybe get into some mistakes, some tough spots. Cause like the hardest thing I've ever had to do as a coach is tell a kid that I really liked that he was going to lose the starting job. And like, that was brutal. It's funny as he was one of the best men at my wedding because we became good friends, but like, I still think back how hard that was. And sometimes those things can screw you up, but there has to be some level of subjectivity, but it just can't trump obvious data, in my opinion. Subjectivity to me is more of a, when the data's close, this is what's going to trump is my subjectivity. That's what's going to trump all the other data. If the data's close, if the data's not close, then your subjectivity is telling you something different, then maybe you're just not a great evaluator of the situation. And then there's also coaching consensus. Marcus Freeman, Mike Denbrock, and Gino Guidugli are all going to have some level of say in this. And so let's say Mike Denbrock, or let's say that Marcus Freeman thinks that so-and-so should be the starter. But Mike Denbrock and Gino Guidugli think that so-and-so should be the starter. That's different. But then if you're a head coach, you got to trust your coaches to say, okay, you guys are making the call. You better be right. You don't want me to step in week 4 and say, time to change it up, but there has to be some of that.
Super chat from Tyler Evans. Appreciate you, Tyler. What did you think of Riley Leonard's NFL debut? In my opinion, he looks like the best quarterback on that roster, and I believe he will start at some point during the season.
Trevor, I know you watched the game last night, so you want to share your thoughts on that. I saw 2 highlights. I saw the out cut he threw, like the over route. That was a friggin' rope. That looked like Duke Riley Leonard. I was happy to see that.
Yeah, I'll say this. I always take preseason games with a grain of salt. You have to. Level of competition that you're facing. I thought Riley Leonard looked like, and there were moments where he was clean. There was moments where some of the issues that kind of plagued him, Notre Dame, plagued him a little bit still in the NFL. Laid on some throws, wouldn't let it go. Took a little bit too much time. But then again, we saw the athletic ability take over. He was moving the chains with his feet. I thought he looked good. The Colts quarterback situation right now is just not good. I mean, I'm sure the people who watched the game saw the hit that Anthony Richardson took, and a lot of the questions that I saw after that moment was, how does the right tackle just not even touch that guy? It's like, well, because Anthony Richardson didn't change the protection. You have a quarterback going into your 3rd year, and you're not going to tell me that it's because of his lack of time in the film room because he's been hurt. What else have you been doing? So there's just stuff that he's going to have to get corrected, and it's going into year 3. They bring in a veteran in Daniel Jones, who's had a very interesting NFL career. He had one good season, and then the Giants saw it fitting to give him $40 million a year. Thought that was an interesting move. And then now you have Riley Leonard. You drafted another quarterback who, let's just call a spade a spade. His strong suit is not pushing the ball down the field. So you kind of have 3 quarterbacks with the same skill set. I was impressed with what I saw from Riley Leonard in comparison, but I mean, Anthony Richardson's going to be out for an undisclosed amount of time because his pinky after he got sacked was bent a different way. But I don't know would I love to see Riley Leonard start? Sure, but I'm not going to put any amount of money on it that he's going to be starting an NFL game this year.
Good stuff. Appreciate you sharing that one. Got another one from my guy Remington Jeans.
Appreciate the super chat. B, you have said you are good with quarterbacks making a mistake if he is aggressively pushing the ball down the field. Where do you draw the line for being aggressive and being just careless? Like Book just never was aggressive down the field.
So your question about the difference between being aggressive and being careless, that's a pretty obvious thing. It verbally, it may seem similar, but on film, it's obvious. Careless is just, there's 2 guys standing there and I'm going to throw it anyway. That's careless. Thinking I have a post shot, trying to take that shot over the top, and I underthrow it by half a foot, and that's enough for a guy like a Bronte Johnson to go make an interception on it. That's not careless. Careless is, okay, it's cover 2. I didn't see cover 2. I threw a ball to the outside with some touch on it, and the safety comes over and picks it off. That's careless. Careless is trying to throw a rope in between 2 when there's 2 defenders between your quarterback and the defender. That's careless. When Kenny threw his pick in practice, that wasn't careless. That was a good learning experience for Kenny. He saw an opening. He didn't think about what's the backside safety doing. He kept his read front side. That's one of those things you have to learn. Hey, if I want to make that throw, I have to have some awareness of that backside safety potentially coming down in some sort of robber coverage, or I'm going to have to hit that guy right out of the break to make sure that safety can't get down. And so those are things where I look at that and I'm like, that's a big mistake by Kenny. But I'm not like, oh, that's why he can't start. No, that's a learning experience. Now let me see what he does the next time we're in this situation. And if I'm a coach, I may be like, hey, like look over to Chris Ash, like, hey, can you give me that again? I'm gonna make this call again. Can you give me that coverage again? Or you may script it the next day when you're going against a scout team if it's like in closer to the season and say, hey, look, I'm going to give him that call again and see if he reads it better this time. See if he learned from his mistake. Because you don't want a quarterback making that throw for the first time in a game. It's like I've talked about this before. One of the things that I had an issue with during the Brian Kelly era, we'd be at practice and everything was scripted for success. Like they always would call up pass plays against the perfect coverage for it. And my thing is that's fine to a degree, but you need to have some stuff that's called where it's not the ideal coverage. Hey, we're running double post and they're in cover 2. Well, okay, I'm going to call that play because I need to, does my quarterback check out of it? Does he look it off? Does he check the backside? Like, hey, I'm going to check a dig back here instead of a double post because I want to get that undercut where if that backside safety goes over top to take the under post, then I can bang that dig underneath. Or I may check to some sort of smash concept backside, or I may check to a run, or hey, I know that they got us, and so I'm just going to throw the check down and take this route. You want to see those things. What does he do when the coverage isn't what we want it to be? And so those are all part of the evaluation process. And like I said, early in fall camp especially, you want to see a quarterback being aggressive. If he's making that same mistake over and over again too, Remington, that's the final piece of carelessness. So if let's say we broke down the interception that CJ threw to Bronte Johnson, or he tried to throw it over Bronte and Bronte just went up and made a great catch. Didn't bother me. It's part of the lesson learned. I get what he's trying to do. Now you just got to have some awareness of who was the guy in between you and the receiver. If it's a Don Schuler, if it's Brandon Logan, if it's, Rod Hurd, like from last year, I can make that throw. If it's 6'2.5", long arm, freaky jumping Bronte Johnson, don't make that throw. Doesn't bother me. What bothers me is he made it again the next day. If he made it again the next day, he made it again 4 days later. And now, dude, this is the 5th time you've done that. He didn't do that. I don't know if he did that. I'm using that particular play as an example. I liked CJ's aggressiveness of trying to put that ball over Bronte to an open receiver. Mistake made. Now you have to have some awareness. But when he does it a second, third, fourth, 5th time, that's careless. You're not thinking about what's going on around you. So those are the things, Remington, where it becomes clear if a guy's reckless because you're just like, there's no justification. Like I could explain to you why CJ threw the post on that first interception. Now, did he make a wrong decision? Yes. Why? Because you got a sense that you have pressure coming down in your face. You can't step into that throw. And you definitely didn't have time to see that backside safety come over. That was a throw that I don't want to see him make again in that specific situation. Now, in a game where if, let's say, the pocket was clean, my coaching point would be throw it higher. Make Micah Gilbert bend back to the football because that's going to keep Bronte from coming over to it. You can't do that when Jared Dawson's screaming right down your face. So there's some coaching to that. But if he does it again the next day and he does it again 2 days later, that's reckless. So it was a mistake, but I want him to be willing to try that play. But if it becomes a consistent pattern, then he's not being aggressive. He's being reckless with the football. He's being careless with the football. So it's either an obviously bad decision. If he tried to throw a center post right down the middle and Bronte's playing deep third, I'm like, dude, that's a terrible decision. Terrible decision. That's not what this one was. But if he still makes that same mistake over and over and over again, now he either can't read a defense or he's careless. If Kenny's picked a Don, didn't bother me. If he makes it a second, a third, a fourth, a 5th time, now I'm concerned about it. Those are the things that I view as the difference between those two things. It's a great question, by the way. Great question.
Super chat from Kay Grant. Appreciate the super chat. Now we are a few years removed from the bowl game against Oklahoma State. What would have changed if Notre Dame won, in your opinion?
A more of a willingness to talk about it. Honestly, Kay Grant, I really think that's it. I don't know that I would have spent a whole lot of time talking about it if they won that game. It's Oklahoma State. I definitely don't spend a lot of time talking about it that they lost it because I've never felt that yes, he was named the head coach, but it was still an interim situation because he didn't coach that team the whole year. But I mean, we'd probably be using it as his record more if they would have won that game, if I'm being honest about it, perhaps. But what would have changed would have been the narrative about Notre Dame and New Year's Six games would have changed, because it wouldn't have really mattered who the head coach was. You won a New Year's Six bowl game. I think that would have been the only thing that really changed, in my opinion. I don't think anything structurally or practically would have happened. The one thing that I've heard people say before is, had the defense not collapsed, there's a chance Mike Elston would have been the D coordinator and not Al Golden. I don't know if that's the case or not, but that would have been an interesting dilemma for Marcus Freeman. Like, it was, if it's, what was it, 28-14 at halftime? 28-7 at halftime?
28-7.
If, let's just say, the defense comes out that next half and just shuts Oklahoma State down, they win 49-13. That's an interesting situation that Marcus Freeman would have found himself in. Do I keep Mike Elston on not only as my D-line coach, but also my D coordinator after the job he did? I don't know that he would have, but I think it would have at least been interesting to see. It would have been at least an interesting decision. But outside of that, I don't know that anything else changes, other than just the narrative about the New Year's Six games would have ended 3 years sooner.
I think that if Notre Dame won against Oklahoma State in the Fiesta Bowl that year, the Marcus Freeman naysayers would have been significantly louder. And hear me out as to why. If they would have won that game, I think a lot of the narrative would have been, yeah, but Brian Kelly got them to that point. And then let's say history holds true. Then it would have been, see, they lost to Marshall. See, they lost to Stanford. See, they lost to a Louisville and Clemson team they had no business losing. See, they lost to Northern Illinois. So, like, let's just say history repeats itself. Like, everything is the exact same from when he took over as head coach and now, but they beat Oklahoma State. I think there would have been a contingency of Notre Dame's fan base that would have been a lot louder about Brian Kelly's departure. You see, Brian Kelly got him to that point, and he would have won the bowl game. Marcus Freeman can't even beat Marshall, and he can't beat Stanford. Like, it would have been loud, I think.
I think that would have, to your point, I think what would have happened, Trevor, is it would have created a bit of a civil war in the fan base that was even greater than the one that already existed. Mm-hmm. Because the BK supporters would have been like, see, he got him to this place. I'm not giving Freeman credit for coaching up Brian Kelly's team. The Freeman supporters would have, I think rightly, have said, there's no way Brian Kelly wins this game because he always choked in these type of games. Mm-hmm. And Freeman in game one, I think it's Chief Brody said, in game one, Freeman did something that Kelly couldn't do in 11 years. I don't know that neither side would have had any justification for it, because you don't know if Kelly would have won that game if he stayed. You don't know if Notre Dame would have lost worse if Kelly. We don't have any clue, but it would have created a lot of that back and forth. Yeah, it would have.
Super chat from Andrew Burke. Thank you, Andrew. In the last 25 years, what players do you think maximized and minimized their physical traits? For Andrew, he thinks that Joey Getherall maximized and minimized Grant Irons.
Boy, that's a long list, Andrew. Just kind of off the top of my head, I mean, some guys that maximized, we were just talking about one the other day. I tweeted about Kyron Williams the other day. I had Kyron Williams near the bottom of my class rankings for offense in 2020 and 2019. I don't know if that kid could have been any better at Notre Dame. On the flip side, you look at a guy like Chris Tyree who minimized that. Now, I don't put all that on Chris Tyree. I put a lot of that on the coaches who never used him properly. But he's certainly one of those kind of guys. Howard Cross, I think, maximized himself through the first 5 years. I thought Howard was disappointing last season. I thought he should have been and could have been a better player. But through the first 5 years, he certainly maximized. There's J.D. Bertrand was like that. Jack Kaiser, Drew White, Drew Tranquil, Julian Love, like Alohi Gilman, Jalen Elliott. Like, there's a lot of guys like that I look at and say, Chris Fink, that absolutely maximized their ability. Kevin Austin incredibly minimized his a kid that has his size and his athleticism being an undrafted free agent that only had one good year at Notre Dame is an absolute minimization of his ability. Aaron Lynch is another one who minimized his potential. Manti maximized it. Jalen Smith maximized it, especially when you consider those stumbling blocks that were in front of him. Jeremiah Usu-Koramoah, I think, came close to maximizing his skills. I mean, there's a lot of those type of guys that over the years maximize their potential, and there's been plenty, sadly, that have minimized it. There's been a lot of Notre Dame players that just flat out should have been better than they were. And some guys that people are saying in the chat are guys that I would disagree with, because I think those guys, again, you can't throw the ball to yourself and you can't put yourself in the game, but at the same time, you when you have those opportunities, you got to take advantage of them. So this boy, we could do a whole show on this. I would argue that Miles Boykin minimized his ability, because I think Miles Boykin should have been better than he was. Like, I don't want to say minimize it, but I don't think he maximized it the way he should have. He shouldn't have needed until his senior year to break out. I would kind of put him in that conversation, but there's some other guys that I would say. Somebody said Ian Book. Again, I don't agree with that. I think Ian Book should have been better than he was. Could have been better than he was. So but I don't think he's far off from maximizing it. I mean, I think he got a lot out of himself, but I think he could have been better. I'm not going to say that he maximized, because I think Ian Book had even more ability, and with a different coach, maybe would have been a little bit better. Off the top of my head, Deshaun Kaiser definitely failed to maximize his traits. That's definitely one that I throw in there. Tommy Reese maximized his ability at Notre Dame as a player. Like, he certainly did. So that's just off the top of my head. Those are some guys that I would say fit that list for me. Any others that pop off the top of your head there, Trev?
Probably put Alize Mack in the conversation for minimized Notre Dame, for how high of a recruit he was and the potential and skill set that he had, compounded to what the product was on the field. I would put him in that conversation. And then, I mean, maximize, like you said, the list is kind of endless. I mean, Jeff Samardzija is in that list. I mean, people who maximize their physical traits. So, yep.
Yeah. Kay Grant said, I know that wasn't easy to talk about. Here's a little extra, guys. I appreciate you, man. I really do. I appreciate that. But no, that was fun to talk about. So we're finally through the super chats, which we appreciate, guys. Let's get back up to the top and kick things off with Aiden Benami.
When do you think is the latest to name a starting quarterback? By next weekend?
I think the latest will be the weekend before the opener against Miami. I think that'll be the latest. I don't think they're going to want to go into week one of prep with two quarterbacks still in competition. I don't think that they're going to want that. That doesn't mean both won't play, but I think they'll have established the roles by week one. I think that's the absolute latest. I don't think it'll take that long, Aiden, but I think that's the latest that they would do it. That's my answer for that one, Trev.
We see that the same. Coleman Smith. Could we see the Notre Dame defense come out in a totally different formation this season based on how they're recruiting? More 4-2-5 or 3-3-5 instead of base 4-3 or 3-4?
Dude, they've been a base 4-2-5 for like 3 years now. In when Marcus Freeman was the D coordinator, they kind of tried some 3-3-5 stuff. Even the next year in 2022, they were more of a 4-2-5. They would occasionally put a third linebacker on the field, but they were like really 50-50. Even with Jack Kaiser playing the rover, they were still a 4-2-5.
Yeah.
In the way that they lined up. They weren't tucking Jack Kaiser inside a whole lot. So I think they've been a 4-2-5 for a while. I don't think that's going to change at all. And I don't think they've been a base 4-3 and a base 4-3-4 for a while. What I would say to you, though, Coleman, is I could see a scenario where maybe we see a little bit more front versatility, front change-ups in mix-ups, I should say, where they do a little bit of 3-3-5 more so this year at times against certain teams than they did in the past. Al Golden never really did that. Marcus Freeman would kind of balance those two things, because I think in a 3-3-5 with this current team against certain looks might make a lot of sense, because then you can have Drake Bowen Kingston and another linebacker on the field together at the same time against teams that want to spread the field, throw it outside, run some misdirection, and throw a quick game where they're going to try to neutralize the D-line by getting rid of the ball quickly. So you want to mix some things up. The only game I really remember Al Golden going with a lot of 3-down stuff was in 2022 against USC, and it just didn't work. I mean, part of the reason it didn't work is they were missing Cam Hart. They were missing Tariq Bracy. I think they had one of their D linemen out, but I could see some 3-3-5 this year. We haven't seen it in practice. We saw some stuff in the spring game with Preston Zinner. I think that was more of a, let's run some nickel stuff and our base looks because we're low on linemen. I think it's more of what that was. We haven't seen any 3-down stuff in practice, but I could see it based on the personnel that they have, where we could see some of that stuff.
Aiden Benami with a 2-parter. Give me Mike Martin over James Blanchard. In my opinion, we dodged a bullet and got the better guy for the job and better fit for Notre Dame. Yes, they might need to pay more to go to Texas Tech, but overpaying and buying players isn't good. Yes, he might not needed to do that at Notre Dame, but I think Coach Freeman got it right.
I don't think that Coach Freeman got it right because Coach Freeman didn't turn down James Blanchard. James Blanchard turned down Notre Dame. You could say it worked out for Notre Dame in the end. Kind of like USC, needing to get rejected by like 3 or 4 coaches before they finally hired Pete Carroll. You don't say USC got it right. You say USC got it wrong. Well, what do you mean? Pete Carroll's a great coach. Yeah. If they got it right, they wouldn't have needed to get turned down by 3 or 4 other people. It's like, oh, Bill Belichick's a brilliant coach for, drafting Tom Brady in the 6th round. If he thought Tom Brady was going to be half the quarterback he turned out to be, he's not wait till round 6 to draft him. If Bill Walsh thought Joe Montana was going to be the quarterback he turned out to be, he doesn't wait till the 3rd round to draft him. I mean, that's like you got lucky. Yes, the eval was good, but you didn't eval him thinking it was going to be what he was. You evaled him enough to think he should be on my team, especially Bill Walsh. 3rd round is still high for a quarterback, especially back then when there was fewer teams. And quarterbacks weren't overdrafted the way that they are now. But still, if you thought Joe Montana was going to be a Super Bowl winning quarterback, you wouldn't have waited until round 3 to draft him. Just like I'm not giving Kyle Shanahan credit for making Brock Purdy Mr. Irrelevant, because if you thought he was going to be what he was, you wouldn't have waited till the very last pick of the draft to take him. And so I don't say he got it right. I could say it ended up working out. But he wanted James Blanchard. And look, a good coach and a good GM will do what's necessary to win at the school they're at. You can't evaluate the job he's doing at Texas Tech and say, well, I'm glad Notre Dame dodged that bullet. Why? He has to do that at Texas Tech. They literally sign 0 of the studs they get if they don't overpay for them. There's no other way to do it. And, you can say buying players isn't good. It's the rules. Notre Dame does that. That's part of the process. So I don't know that Notre Dame does it in the same way that other schools do it all the time. But let's not kid ourselves and act like all these kids are coming to Notre Dame and they're getting Burger King coupons as their NIL project, payoffs. It's not happening. They're also getting paid too. Now, are their kids taking less money to come to Notre Dame? Sure, but they're still taking some money. They're not coming here for free. Because if it was for free, they'd go somewhere else that's going to pay him 6 figures. James Blanchard's doing exactly what he needs to do to win at Texas Tech. And I would have to think that if he chose to come to Notre Dame, he would not be the same type of coach or recruiter. He'd be doing things a little bit differently because that's what works in Notre Dame. That's what good coaches do. Would he have had the foresight to do that? I don't know. But I know that Marcus Freeman thought enough of him to really want him for that job. So, I think it's worked out well for both. I think it's worked out for James, and it's worked out well so far for Notre Dame.
Coleman Smith, thoughts on the quarterback competition that some people are saying we could see 2 quarterbacks the first game?
Sure, we could see 2 quarterbacks in the first game. I mean, that's something that's been discussed. You could see Kenny Minchey getting a red zone package or a short yardage package or something like that. I don't think we're going to see 2 quarterbacks playing. Outside of that, I don't have opinion on what other people say. But yeah, that's not exactly earth-shattering information. That's been discussed for a while. Marcus Freeman's even said that could happen. So I don't think that's like a great read on the situation. This is what that coach said might happen. So sure, it might happen. What makes you say that? Marcus Freeman said so. That's what makes me think it might happen.
It's a good source.
Yeah, it's a pretty good source. Yeah, pretty good. Yeah.
ND, it just means more. Over under 20 receptions and 350 plus receiving yards for Cam Williams at the end of the season.
Based on where we are right now today and what we know right now today, I'd say under. Based on where we are today.
With that.
You agree with that, Trev?
I do. Mohammed Abdi, Brian, according to Pro Football Focus, Notre Dame has a top 10 unit at running back, receiver, O-line, linebacker, and defensive back. Do you agree? And what will it take to recruit the D-line at a high level?
Well, I think they already are. First of all, I agree that Notre Dame has a top 10 running back room. I agree that Notre Dame has a top 10 receiver room. I agree that they have a top 10 O-line room. I agree they have a top 10 D-line room or linebacker room and a top 10 DB room. I would also like to point out that there was at least one, if not two, preseason magazines that had Notre Dame's D-line as a top 10 unit as well.
Athlon did. I think they were 10th in Athlon's.
I think they were also top 10 on Phil Steele. I'm actually going to try to look that up here real quick and see if I can find that, but I'm pretty sure that they did as well. But can there still be room for the defensive line to be better from a recruiting standpoint? Of course there is. There's certainly room where they can get better. What does that look like? It's what Al Washington is in the process of doing right now. If he's able to add Elijah Golden to this class, this is exactly what elite recruiting should look like on the defensive line. You combine that with the fact that in recent years they have landed a guy like a Bryce Young. They have landed a guy like Boubacar Traore. They have landed Logan Thomas. They have landed Josh Burnham, converted him to linebacker. That was the staff. That was Marcus Freeman as the D coordinator. They have gone out and got Davion Dixon, who I think is going to be a really good player. Cole Mullins is flashing and he's doing exactly this fall what he was doing in the spring, according to a source of mine. It's a little free nugget for you that I put out there, and there's guys like that. And then of course you look to this 2026 class, and that's the answer to your question: is keep doing that every year. But I do think Notre Dame has a top 10 D line right now. I would just say I'd say they have a borderline top 10 D line right now, meaning like they're 8 to 12 for me. And they're in the top 10 because of the God-given talent that's in the room, and it's impressive. They're outside the top 10 if you want to make that argument, because a lot of that's unproven. Boubacar's unproven. Bryce is unproven. Jared Dawson's got to show that he can do at Notre Dame what he did at Louisville. Marmel Mukum's unproven. Logan Thomas is unproven. So I think that's the thing that you could say has him right outside. But there aren't many teams in the country. I'll tell you this right now. There aren't more than 5 teams maybe that have a more athletic 1-2 punch at defensive end than Notre Dame does with Boubacar Traore and Bryce Young. I ain't counting Jordan Patelho because he's not full speed yet. But there's talent there. It's just, can they turn it into production? So that's going to be the big thing. Development of the Boubacars and the Bryce Youngs and the Armo Mukums and the guys like that, and then continue to recruit like they're doing right now with the guys that they're getting in this 2026 class. That's the key, Muhammad.
A. Reagan, do you think the Big Ten and SEC protects its top teams with gifting them middle-of-the-road teams at home and bad teams away, or is that just my perception?
I think that's your perception based on a lack of context of previous and prior years. So you're going to look at Georgia's schedule this year, and you're going to say, look, I know that Georgia plays some tough teams, but dude, like, what is this? Like, are they protecting Georgia? And I'm being a bit hyperbolic to make a point here, A. Reagan. I'm not mocking you in any way. It's a very fair question. I'm like, yeah, they got to play Tennessee on the road, but they get Alabama at home. They get Ole Miss at home. They get Texas at home. Like, what kind of schedule is that? Well, it's the opposite year, because last year they played at Ole Miss, at Alabama, and at Texas. Well, there is no more top team in the SEC than Georgia. I mean, they have been the dominant team in the SEC. Their down year was this year where they went 11-2 and still won the league. I don't think it was the 13-1 year where Bama beat them in the SEC title game. And then you look at Alabama and you look at their schedule this year. They play at Georgia, at South Carolina. They get Oklahoma and LSU at home. Well, that's because they played Oklahoma and LSU on the road last year. And they got Georgia at home last year. So I don't think they're doing it by playing middle-of-the-road teams at home and bad teams away, because in a lot of these instances, they're rotating home and away from year to year. I do think, however, that there are some of the teams in the SEC that are getting a little bit easier schedule than others. I'm looking at you, Texas. I think the SEC certainly said to Texas, like, hey, welcome to the league. We're happy you're here. So in your first 2 years, you're not going to play Bama. You're not going to play Texas. You're not going to play LSU. You're not going to play, Tennessee. You're going to get Georgia, sure, and you're going to get Florida. Of course, you're going to get Oklahoma and Texas A&M because they're rivals. But I think they gave them a much softer schedule than they gave Oklahoma, for example. I think the issue is more the imbalance, where a team like Florida's got to play what they play, and then a team like Texas has to play what they play. Like, if you're Brian Kelly, I'm like, look at my schedule compared to freaking Texas's schedule. I'm not happy about that. I'm not happy about that at all. So I think it's more, that would be the thing where I think you could make a case that they are protecting certain teams, but it's not the top teams, because as we pointed out, Georgia is the top team in the SEC, and their schedule the last 2 years has been nuts. Just nuts. LSU's a top team in the SEC. They got a brutal schedule this year. Even if you take out Clemson, that's a really hard schedule. Then you throw Clemson in, you're like, whew, good luck with that. And you got a head coach who can't win big games. Have fun there, Hoss. You know what I mean? Like, good luck with that. But like Ole Miss is another one. I think Ole Miss has been gifted a more manageable schedule the last couple of years. But that's kind of where I'm at on it. It's a fair question, but I just think you have to zoom out a little bit and look at like what's year before, or potentially what's coming next year. It's like, man, that team's got 3 of their 4 hardest games are at home. That's soft. Okay, but let's look at 2026 and 2024. Was it the exact opposite in those other years? And in a lot of cases, it was. All right, good one. Let's go to Blaine.
Blaine Tiller, with the current team and coaches, who do you think would excel more, Brady Quinn or Jimmy Clausen?
Jimmy Clausen. Yeah, I do. I think Brady Quinn was a heck of a quarterback. He was a winner and all, but as far as like you put equal talent around him, Jimmy Clausen's the better player. Like Jimmy Clausen would have put up stupid numbers if he was throwing to Jeff Samardzija, Mo Vol, Raymond McKnight, Anthony Fasano with Mark LaVore and Dan Stevenson and Dan Santucci and Ryan Harris and Dan Sullivan protecting him. Like if Jimmy Clausen was a junior in 2005, and you're not going to find a bigger Brady Quinn fan than me, other than maybe somebody who named their kid Brady Quinn. Like literally, there's a 2028 quarterback whose name is Brady Quinn. We named our first dog Brady, right? Big Brady Quinn fan. But I can, and Jimmy will never be as good as Brady was as a leader, because Brady, and that's not a knock on Jimmy. I don't know that it's possible to have a better leader than Brady Quinn. But Jimmy Clausen's ability to just drop back and throw the football is just significantly better than Brady's was. And we saw what he did with Golden Tate and Michael Floyd and not a lot else. Terrible O-line, terrible defense. What would he have done in the 05 team? And I've said this a bunch of times, like, you put like Jimmy Clausen on some of the teams we've had in recent seasons. You put Jimmy Clausen on the team in 2018 with that defense and Miles Boykin and Chase Claypool and Chris Fink and Alizé Mack and that talent, like Jimmy would have been ridiculously good. He just happened to play at a time where outside of the receivers and tight ends, there wasn't a lot else.
Yeah.
So I think Brady would have been very good in the current era. I think Jimmy would have been lights out on this 2025 team. I think Brady might have been better on last year's team with a worse offensive line where you needed his size to bounce off. I was watching a little bit of the 05 BYU game, and I remember that first touchdown he threw, I think it was a Stovall. he has a guy coming clean and he kind of shakes the guy off and steps into the pocket and zips one in the back of the end zone. I don't know if Jimmy could do that. But if with this year's, what I expect this year's line to be, it's Jimmy. So there's some individual seasons where I would have maybe taken Brady. But most years it's going to be Jimmy. As long as the offensive line's good, it's going to be Jimmy. Jimmy would have been killed in 2021. You would have wanted Brady Quinn in 2021. Like, there's no doubt. But, 2022, 2023 for sure. Yeah. 2025, yeah, for sure. End of the day, though, they're both great quarterbacks and two of my favorite Notre Dame quarterbacks.
Yeah, from a skill set standpoint, I would take Clausen too. I think the one thing that I wish that I could have seen from him that Quinn also has on him is, like, I want to know what Jimmy Clausen would have done in like a big game. Like, I watched Brady Quinn play in the Fiesta Bowl in 05, the Sugar Bowl in 06. I watched him play against USC in 05 and games like that. And because of how bad the team was, we just didn't get to see it. So that's not me saying I think he would have done poorly. It's just we just didn't get to see him in big games. I mean, to my recollection, like the biggest game that he played in was I guess magnitude of the game. Go
ahead, Trev. I'm listening.
No, I'm thinking.
USC was number 6 in 2009, and I thought Jimmy played really well that game. I mean, they were getting whooped pretty good early, and he came back and just made some brilliant throws. I've said this before, that touchdown pass to Golden Tate over top of Taylor Mays and a cornerback in the end zone was as good of a throw as you can make. And he got beat up a little bit, but he finished that game 24-43, 260 yards, 2 touchdowns, and also rushed for a touchdown at 3 touchdowns in that game. His defense was terrible. I mean, that's really what it boiled down to. But they were down pretty big at one point in time. It was 20-7, and then Jimmy throws a touchdown pass, and then USC scores and twice, and it's 34-14. All of a sudden, Jimmy starts bringing it back again and gets them back in the game. It's just, like you said, the team was so bad that it was really hard to tell. And like there's other games, like it's part of it's that, but then it's also like, how did he handle when like the game was on the line? And Jimmy usually was pretty good. I think of the Purdue game in 2009 when he started, and then they put him on the bench because he couldn't move, and Dane comes in, and then Purdue takes a late lead, and they put Jimmy back in, and he leads them down on a touchdown drive, hits Kyle Rudolph for a touchdown. I thought Jimmy was pretty clutch. You think of some of it was at 2009 when they're playing Washington in the rain, and just a back and forth game, and it goes overtime. He's battling Jake Locker in that game, and Jimmy's just dealing, threw for like 400 something yards in that game. No Michael Floyd in that game, by the way. So I think Jimmy would have been fine in those situations. But to your point, it's a guess. It's not something that I know, because to your point, he wasn't put in a lot of those situations. The Michigan teams he played in 08 and 09 were not very good. So it's like, it's hard to tell how he would have done if he was playing a top 10 Michigan team like Brady had to face in 05 and 06. It's a fair question, Trev. I think he would have been good. But
absolutely.
Brady was going to step up in most of those games. Yeah. And that's the hard part, because like you said, Brady had a better team. Riley Leonard had a better team. Tony Rice had a better team. Jimmy didn't. Now that I'm talking about Jimmy Clausen and how some Notre Dame fans feel about him, I'm starting to understand and be remembered that, yes, there is always that contingent of Notre Dame fans that are just going to hate on the big-time quarterback prospect. Just will. Like, some of the CJ Carr nonsense is starting to make a little bit more sense to me now. Yep. Like, okay, yeah, I forgot about that. There's still people that think Jimmy Clausen sucked at Notre Dame. That's right. Those are the people that are most likely saying, I don't like CJ Carr. It should be Kenny Minchie. Okay.
Oh, yeah. They're the same people that
if
forgot
Kenny
how
was
good
a job,
the league
great.
was.
But there's people actively I've seen it on social media, and there's a little bit of it on our board. It's mostly social media, like actively rooting against CJ Carr. And I'm like, that's nuts to me. Like, okay, that's right. There's similar people like that on message boards back in 08 and 09 with Jimmy, just waiting on him to make a mistake so they can be like, see, he's always overrated. Okay. Yeah, Jimmy Clausen's the problem. Sure, buddy. Okay. It's not that defense that can't stop me, you, and 9 of our buddies from hanging up 3 touchdowns on him. Can't be that. It's Jimmy, sure. Okay, keep telling yourself that.
Question from Salty: which is the toughest place to play, Georgia, Florida, or Oregon?
Georgia because that's where the best team is. I'll say this until I die. The toughest places to play are where the best teams play. Like, there was a time when Nick Saban was getting beat by Louisiana Monroe at home. There was a time when beating Alabama and Tuscaloosa wasn't much of a thing. What changed? They got really good, and then you can't beat them there, like hardly at all. I mean, it's who's the best teams? I think environment can play some kind of role. I would argue that Washington's been a little bit of a tougher place to play in recent years than Oregon. I think if you're going to talk about toughest places to play, you need to have Washington on this list. They haven't lost a home game in 3 years?
Mm-hmm.
So I think they need to be on there. But I think Georgia's it's a loud fan. I've been there, been at a game there. I think it's a loud fan base. It's a very loyal fan base, and it's a very, very good team. Florida was not an easy place to play when their coaches are good, when their team is good. I watched Miami go in there and annihilate them in Gainesville last year. So you can't put Notre Dame in that conversation because Notre Dame's current coach has lost at home to Stanford, Marshall, and Northern Illinois. But the rest of the year, nobody enjoyed playing in South Bend. You know what I mean? Nobody else enjoyed playing in Notre Dame Stadium the rest of the year. So it just depends on where the best team is. And I think the best team on this list is Georgia. So I'm going to say Georgia.
Yeah, I'd also go Georgia. Yeah, I would go Georgia. I mean, I will say sometimes I think that stadiums, it's kind of I agree with what you're saying. But I think sometimes it's just a reputation that the stadium has too. I mean, the Notre Dame coaching staff and the players talked about how intimidating of a place to play Texas A&M was, and they finished the season 8-5. Mm-hmm. And so I do think that there is a factor to crowd noise and the size and the reputation of the stadium. Michigan's still a tough place to play, and they weren't that good last year. So it's some of it is by reputation, but for the most part, to your point, it's Bryant-Denny Stadium got much tougher to play when Nick Saban came rolling into town. That's for sure.
Right, that's right. And it wasn't that way in year one.
Mm-hmm.
It eventually got to that point in time. He's got 3 of these, so let's go to all of them.
Okay, here we go. Penn State, Washington, or Ohio State. I mean,
the toughest place to play right now is Ohio State because they have the better team. But if you're going to say which of these 3 places, if everything else is equal, is the toughest place to play, roster's the same, coach is the same, it's going to be Washington because most of the teams that have to go to Washington have to go a long way. And it's a very loud stadium. It's a very rabid stadium. So I would say if everything was equal, I would say it's Washington. And I also don't think loudness is necessarily the end-all, be-all to toughness as far as the toughest place to play. I've seen Ohio State have no problem going into Happy Valley and beating Penn State. So I think it's Ohio State 1 because of the team, and it's also a rabid, loud fan base. Number 2, Washington, very close behind him. And then number 3, Penn State. But I would say this, the last 2 years, Ohio State's lost more home games than Washington has.
Yeah.
It's a little something to think about.
It's a good point.
If you wanted to go with Washington, Trevor, I wouldn't argue with you. But I'm going to stick to the toughest place to play is where the best team is, and Ohio State is the better team than those 3 people.
Yeah. Yeah, I would – we have the same order in that one as well. Alabama, Texas, or Texas A&M?
I'm going to go A&M. I'm going to go A&M, and here's why I'm going to go A&M. Because I've been at Texas, and that stadium wasn't that crazy or loud. I've never been to Alabama, but Saban's constantly complaining about how they don't fill up the stadium unless it's against another top team. I've seen Bama get beat at home a few times in recent years. And I'm telling you right now, that A&M place was rocking last year. That was loud. That was vibrating. There's a lot of scenic distractions for a road player. I'll go A&M is the toughest place to play as far as environment. But if I had to play a game against the current teams, I'd rather play at Texas A&M than at Alabama or at Texas. So I'm going to answer this one a little bit differently. My answer to fit the other 2 is probably right now, probably Texas. But as far as if you want to get into environment, so I kind of did that with the Washington one last time. That's how I feel about the Texas A&M one. That is a tougher place to play in regard to the environment. The problem is teams go there and win, because the team's not that good or hasn't been that good. But the environment, that was one of the most raucous environments I've been in. And I've been in Ohio Stadium when Notre Dame's played Ohio State. I've been in Michigan Stadium when Notre Dame played Michigan. I've been at Clemson to watch Notre Dame play Clemson. I've been at Georgia to watch them play Georgia. I've been at Texas to watch them play Texas. I've been to a lot of places to watch Notre Dame play football games. And the A&M game was probably the loudest one I've been a part of, as far as just like start to finish. That was certainly the most vibrating, like the most rocking of the press box I've ever been a part of, outside of 2016 NC State. But that was rocking for a whole different reason. We were in the middle of a hurricane. But other than that, it was a pretty awesome environment. But Notre Dame wasn't bothered by it, because if you're a mature team and you're a good football team, you're going to beat the teams that you're better than more often than not.
Yeah, I'm the same order. A&M, Alabama, Texas. So another factor of this too, Salty, is like what time of day is the game. Stadiums are just louder at night. I don't know what it is. I mean, that's Notre Dame Stadium. That's a bunch of different stadiums. It's just stadiums are louder at night.
Yep. Agree.
Coleman Smith, out of the 3 nickels Notre Dame has gotten in the portal the past 3 seasons, how would you rank them as college players?
Well, coming into Notre Dame, I'd probably go Devontae Smith 1, Thomas Harper slightly behind him. And part of that is because Thomas was dealing with some injuries. He had gotten banged up a little bit. Thomas played a lot more than Devontae did. Devontae didn't really become a key part of the rotation until last year. And then Jordan Clark 3rd. That's how I rank them as college players coming into Notre Dame. It's unfair to rank them with what they did at Notre Dame because we haven't seen Devontae yet. But of the 2 that were in Notre Dame, I'd go Thomas Harper 1, Jordan Clark 2. They were all good, but I just think Thomas was better. I think Thomas Harper was a very underrated player in 2023.
Agreed.
Very underrated player.
Coleman Smith, project the captains. Reasons for those projections. On offense, I'll go Emil Wagner. I'm just impressed every single time I hear him talk to the media. He carries himself a little bit different, very mature. He is one of the oldest offensive linemen in the room. So I think that he will be one of the captains. I think Jeremiah Love will be potentially one of Jaden Greathouse or Malachi Fields, depending on how that goes. And then defensively, Adon Schuler, Drake Bowen, I think those are kind of shoo-ins. And then probably one of the defensive linemen. You know, I could see like a Josh Burnham type being a captain for Notre Dame this year, or a junior Tui Alamaka type player this year. So those would probably be mine. Reasons for them, I mean, they're kind of your leaders of those units right now. You know, I mean, Drake Bowen stepped into a leadership role as a sophomore. Adon Schuler did the same thing. So I think those are kind of the no-brainers. And then, I mean, Josh Burnham or Junior on the more likely Josh Burnham, but I mean, along the defensive line, I don't see it being any of the interior guys. You know, I'm
with you.
I mean, the most likely interior guy would probably be Donovan Heinisch, if I was thinking about it.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to have one. I don't think they're going to have an interior guy.
Nope. So those would be mine.
I'm going to give you 4 that I'm the most confident in. 2 on offense, 2 on defense. On offense, it's Jeremiah Love. And after talking to different sources, my opinion has actually changed for my second most confident on offense. It used to be either Greathouse or Emil Wagner. Now it's Billy Schrauth, based on some things I've heard. And then obviously some things that were made public when the offensive line were talking. I could also see Jaden Greathouse being in there too, but my 2 that I'm most confident in are Jeremiah Love and Billy Schrauth. On defense, the 2 I'm most confident in are Drake Bowen and Adon Schuler. To me, I could be wrong. They just seem like no-brainer picks. I could see a Josh Burnham. I could see a junior Tuihalamaka. I could see Leonard Moore being a very rare sophomore captain, but I think they might wait a year to give him a captaincy. But Marcus Friend's already talked about, like, hey, we're challenging him to be a leader. We're challenging him to do for these young guys what Benjamin Morrison did for him. But I don't know if I'm quite there with captain yet, ready for him. But those would be my 4 that I think I'm most likely. And reasons why they're your leaders. I mean, it really is that simple, Coleman. Those are the guys to me that that lead by example, lead with their words, are guys that can step into a room and say, hey, fellas, it's time to get this thing going. Guys that when they speak, people listen to them. Guys that do the work necessary to be leaders as well. You can't have a guy that talks the talk that's not in the weight room giving you everything he's got, not at all the mandatory. Hey, this guy's at half the mandatory workouts, but he wants to be a captain. Nope. So, yeah.
Getting into hour 2 of the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by FanDuel, part of the Believe Network. It's Friday Free-For-All Mailbag. ND, it just means more. Over under 3 interceptions for Tay Johnson, 3 sacks for Bowen. Onye and Young combined for 9+ sacks.
All right, so first one, Trev. Over under 3 interceptions for Bronte Johnson. Or Tay Johnson, excuse me.
I'm gonna take the over. I'm gonna stick with my bold prediction.
I'm with
Taking
you.
the over.
Over under on Drake Bowen getting 3 sacks this season. Now, just for context, last year Drake Bowen had 1 sack as starting middle linebacker, so this would be a jump. So let's go Drake Bowen sacks at 3.
I'm gonna take the over.
If we were doing a buy sell hold, I'd say hold, because I think he's going to get about 3. I think that's kind of the number that I think we'll get to. I could see him going over, because we've said if they use him like they did last year, there was 3 or 4 times where he was like split second late.
That is what I was thinking about.
Yeah.
Yep. The step late on Gunnar Stockton, the step late on Tyler Shuck, the step late on Will Howard. Yeah. Those are the ones that I was thinking of.
And then Jason Onye and Bryce Young combined for at least 9 sacks. True, false? Or over, under, if you want to go up that way.
I'm going to take the over.
Agree. Yeah, we're on the same page. On the same page. I want to get a couple here from people we haven't got to yet. Here is a good one. Speaking of over-unders.
From FW Coach, over under 2.5 sacks for Devontae Smith.
I'm actually going to take the over on that one.
Love that. Love that a lot.
It's basically 1 every 5 games.
I mean, we've talked about how he's kind of a really good hybrid between Thomas Harper and Jordan Clark in terms of ability. And they rushed Thomas Harper off the edge quite a bit. Yeah, I'm going to take the over too. I like that pick.
Good reminder on that comparison, because that's where I see that, of him being a guy that's used more to attack. You weren't going to do that with Jordan Clark last year.
No.
But Thomas Harper had 2 sacks, and he only played 11 games. Thomas Harper would have played 15 or 16 games. I promise you he would have had more than 2 sacks, because it's exactly it. It's basically an average of 1 every 5 games. Yep.
John A1, home openers versus non-FCS opponents have been a rough road during the Freeman era. Lost to Marshall in 2022. They beat Tennessee State in 2023 and lost to Northern Illinois last season. At the moment will be the first, ATM. Oh my goodness. Texas A&M will be the first P4 opponent. Will Notre Dame have trouble in the opener?
ATMs are always my enemy and my opponent. There's no question about that. Will they have trouble in the opener? Yes, from the standpoint of it's going to be a tough game, because it's a really good team. I've said this before. I think A&M is the best team that Notre Dame is going to play this year. I think they're the toughest matchup that Notre Dame is going to play this year. Obviously, the Miami road environment will be tougher for Notre Dame, but I do think they'll have trouble. I think they'll win, but I think A&M gives them a game, Trev. We talked about this. Obviously, we'll get into some FanDuel stuff as we get different questions. But like you told me that what the FanDuel has the spread of that game 7.5. Notre Dame is
favored. Yeah, Notre Dame is favored by 7.5 right now.
By FanDuel. That surprised me. That surprised me, because I think A&M's a really good team. Really good team. And they're an interesting team too, Trev, because there's some people that look at them and don't think much of them. We've seen them outside the top 25 this year, as far as like how people view them. that surprises me a little bit because I look at Texas A&M and I'm like, that's a good football team. Like, that's a really good football team. But then I look at how some other people view them, and you're like, I think one of the polls had them like 7th or 8th in the SEC preseason polls and things like that. I think they're a top 4 to 5 SEC team at least this year. So I think that they'll have tough, but I think they win the game. But I think A&M's going to be a tough. I even saw. It was kind of a really awful video because like the guy didn't know anything about like Notre Dame or any of their opponents, but like these two guys that cover A&M had them one of them had them at 5 and 7. Like what? So it's interesting how they're viewed, but I think it'll be a tough game. But I think it's a game Notre Dame wins. If Notre Dame whoops Texas A&M at home, I'm going to be like, this is going to be a big year for Notre Dame because that's a good football team.
Agreed.
I mean, heck, Mike Denbrock, Notre Dame needed a walk-off touchdown from Audric Estime to beat Mike Elko's Duke team. And then last year they gave him a game. So if they whoop them this year, it's going to be like, okay, this team is different.
Yeah. Yep. Especially, I mean, out of all of those coaches, this is going to be the first head coach in all of Marcus Freeman's home openers that aren't going to be overwhelmed by the moment of coming to Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
That'll be another interesting factor.
Yep. Agree.
Super chat from Connor Grant. Does Notre Dame make the playoffs at 10-2?
It's possible. I don't think Notre Dame, I think Notre Dame would have made it last year at 10-2. If they'd have lost to USC in the last game, I think Notre Dame still makes it. I just think they travel. They would have been on the road. But I think Notre Dame would have made it in either Indiana or Tennessee. I think this would have made it in last year. I think Tennessee was the last. No, Tennessee wasn't. Who was the last? Indiana was the last at large, right? Because Texas was.
SMU was 11th.
Yeah, because Penn State was okay. So yeah, SMU would have. I think Notre Dame's in over SMU or Indiana, if not higher than both. But they would have been on the road in week 1. So or in round 1. But I still think they would have got in. Could they get in this year? It depends on who they lose to, how they lose, when they lose, and then what else is going on in college football. Last year's year, they would have, to me, I think definitely got in at 10-2. This year, the way I think the season's going to go, I don't know if it's going to be as easy to get in at 10-2. So it just depends on context. But Notre Dame is able to make the playoffs at 10-2. There's almost zero chance that a 10-2 Notre Dame team is hosting the way that Ohio State was last year. And the only reason Ohio State hosted last year is because there was just a bunch of 3-loss teams in the SEC.
Yep.
If Alabama, in my opinion, beats Oklahoma, and was it game 11, Ohio State's on the road, probably playing Alabama. Like, look at where the rankings were. 10-2 Alabama's probably ranked higher in the final ranking than 10-2 Ohio State, based on where Bama was before the Oklahoma loss compared to Ohio State, and then Ohio State losing to a mediocre Michigan team down the stretch. I think they would have leaped Alabama over Ohio State if they don't lose to Oklahoma. I do.
Oh yeah. I mean, there was a chance last year that if Miami doesn't lose to Syracuse and Alabama doesn't lose to Oklahoma, I think it's a real interesting conversation with that Ohio State team then.
Yeah.
I mean,
I think what would have ultimately happened is SMU and Indiana would have got bumped out, but Ohio State would have been the 11 seed.
Yeah, I mean, it would have depended on if the committee would have stuck true to what they were saying about they're not going to punish a team if they lose in their conference championship or not.
I think they would have dropped SMU out because I don't know that they would have made that statement in the current reality. Because in that present reality, he said that there was a 3-loss Bama team. There was a 3-loss Ole Miss team. And I think they were looking at, are we really going to put a 2-loss ACC team that didn't play in the ACC title game over a 2-loss ACC team that did play in the conference title game? I think that's what a lot of that was about. Was sure. We're not jumping Miami over SMU if SMU loses this game. I think that's where a lot of that came from. Because like the other teams were no-brainers. Like who else was he saying that for? The second team in the Big 12 wasn't getting in, so it's irrelevant to that league. A&M and Texas and Georgia, they were both getting in anyway. Penn State and Oregon were both getting in anyway. There was no danger of either of those teams getting knocked out. Who is the only team that might have gotten knocked out by losing their conference title game? It was SMU. And I think it really came down to because you weren't going to put Miami in over them when Miami had 2 losses in the league. That's what I think that was for. And if we're sitting here with a 2-loss Bama team that just beat Oklahoma on the road and a 2-loss Ole Miss team that had beaten Florida the week before, I don't know if that same statement gets made. That's the interesting part. That's a pure guess, speculation on my part, Trev. Pure speculation.
That makes sense.
This year, I think it'll be a little bit different than last year. I think there's going to be a lot more 2-loss teams in that battle for the last spot. And that's ultimately why I think we're going to go to 16, because they're going to see some of these Big Ten teams, these Big Ten coaches and ADs are going to watch one of their 2-loss teams get left out over somebody else's 2-loss teams or vice versa and say, we need to expand to 16. But if the other leagues are going to draw a hard line on, hey, it's either 12 or 16 with no AQs beyond the conference winners, I think those Big Ten teams will say, we need the bigger thing because we're getting in if there's 13, 14, 15, and 16.
Yeah.
I think that could be the kind of push for that.
Super chat from Tyler Evans. In your opinion, what team has never recovered after the COVID season? Thank you for the super chat, Tyler.
That is a good question.
I got a couple.
You could argue. Yeah, go for it.
The first team that jumped out to mind was Florida. Florida in 2019, they go 11-2. 2020, they go 8-4. Since then, they went 6-7, 6-7, 5-7. In what people thought was pretty improbable, went 8-5 last year, and then this year we'll see. I think Wisconsin is another team in that conversation. In 2019, they go 10-4. 2020, they go 4-3. They go 2021, they go 9-4 and 21, but since then it's been downhill. They went 7-6, 7-6, 5-7. I think their success in 21 was just a lot of roster retention from that 2020 team, and then they lost them and haven't been the same. And then the last team that I think that you could make an argument for, LSU to a degree, not the same. Wins, losses wise, sure. But 2019, you had a really good, obviously a very good year. 2020, they fell apart. And then since then, Kelly's brought them back to like double-digit wins, but they just kind of haven't gotten that big one, So beat Alabama in 3. But so I put LSU in that conversation because it's been a lot of underwhelming things. You got a Biletnikoff Award winner and a Heisman Award winner, and you go 9-4 that season. I don't know, but I think there's an argument for them. But it's not. If somebody wanted to disagree, I'm not going to pound my fist in debate.
I'd say Michigan recovered pretty well. I would contend that Clemson's never been the same since that year.
Yeah.
Haven't been the same team. They've been good, but they haven't recovered fully from that season. I think a team that has not recovered from the COVID year is because I look at it differently, not just wins and losses, but like, did the COVID thing hurt you more? And I don't think Stanford's ever recovered from that, because Stanford, and I'm not trying to get into a debate about what was right or what was wrong. This is a fact. California had way stricter laws about things you could or couldn't do during the COVID stuff than other states did. There's things that kids in Florida could do, working out wise, working out together, things like that you couldn't do in California, legally couldn't do in California. And then Stanford as an institution had some really strict situations going on. And I just think that's one of many factors that combine together to where Stanford hasn't recovered. Now Stanford was already kind of starting to take a dive as a program. They went 4-8 that year before, but I think that was the final nail in the coffin that season, and they haven't recovered since then. I think that's one. That's another one that I look at, but Clemson is one that's interesting. Now, I don't know that Clemson's is because of COVID entirely, but I do think the losing time on the recruiting trail stagnated them a little bit from a recruiting standpoint. I do think that was part of it, because you couldn't be out on the road and you couldn't sell your program and all those other kind of things. And, that obviously was a bit of an issue. I'll tell you a team that was pretty good before COVID stuff hit, who hasn't been very good since. And I don't know if it's necessarily because of COVID, but Virginia was 8-5, 9-5, and then they haven't been better than 5-5 since that year. Like, they've struggled since then. Bronco Mendenhall only lasts one more year at UVA, and he gets out. Like, that's another one that I look at and I wonder, like, did that year have anything to do with that? It's a good question.
Michigan State also. Michigan State could be in that conversation.
In 2021, they were 11-2. So, like, the year after COVID, they had a great year. Yeah. I don't think they've recovered from Mel Tucker. I think that's more of the issue with Michigan State.
Sure.
They haven't recovered from how Mel Tucker ran that program into the ground. Yeah. Speaking of Clemson, here's a question from John Leahy.
Will the job Matt Luke does in year 2 determine Clemson's success this year?
John, I think that is absolutely, positively spot on. Yes. Look, there's certain things that I just assume are going to happen this year. I think Cade Klubnik's going to be good. I think they're going to have a great receiving core. I don't really – running backs are fine. You know, I don't think that's a position that they have to be great at. They're talented in the front seven. They've got a couple good DBs. Tom Allen's a great hire there. I think the big thing is going to be, how does Matt Luke get this unit to play well together? There's a lot of talent, a ton of experience on the Clemson offensive line. But how do they play? They were very underwhelming last year. For all the talent they have and the experience, they were experienced last year because all those kids had to play so much in 2022 because of all their injuries. Or 2023, excuse me, because of all the injuries. I thought they'd be better on the offensive line last year. So, yeah, I think Matt Luke has a big, big task in front of him. And how he is for them what I think Joe Rudolph is going to be for Notre Dame this year, which is, he may not get all the love. You're going to hear Chris Ash love and Mike Denbrock love and Mike Brown love and Al Washington love and Mike Mickens, of course, love from how I think this season is going to go. But if Notre Dame has the season that I think they're going to have, the position coach who I think is going to have the biggest impact is going to be Joe Rudolph. If Notre Dame is underwhelming this year, the coach who's going to have the biggest impact is going to be Joe Rudolph. And I think the same thing applies for Matt Luke. If Clemson disappoints this year, I think first place we're going to look is the offensive line. If Clemson gets back to being Clemson, which means they're a semifinal team or better, we're going to look back and say, boy, look at the job Matt Luke did getting that offensive line finally playing to its potential. I think so. I absolutely think that's a great observation, John. Great observation.
Joseph Barrett, Brian, the last 3 years of Holtz's tenure was that good. There was a noticeable drop in talent.
Not that good is what he meant to say. Not that good.
Okay. What exactly happened? Did the AD and administration turn on Lou? Was he pushed out?
There were a lot of factors in that. I think all those things were part of it. Vinny Serrato was not there anymore, which hurt their recruiting. He had lost some really good coaches and didn't replace them with better coaches. Like he never replaced Barry Alvarez well. You know, Gary Darnell wasn't the hire. Rick Minter wasn't that guy. And he recruited to move away from the option, but he never actually did it. You know, there was never another Tony Rice after Tony Rice, except maybe Kevin McDougal. And what happened that one year he had Kevin McDougal quarterback? They were pretty good. Rick Meyer should have been in more of a pro-style offense. Ron Paula should have been more of a pro-style offense. The administration turned on him quite a bit. That was a big part of it. You know, not bringing in Randy Moss when he got in that fight. I mean, Randy Moss was admitted to Notre Dame. He was signed, sealed, delivered to Notre Dame, and then he gets in that big fight and gets arrested, and they wouldn't take him. I think part of that was to hammer Lou. There was a lot of people in the higher up levels that didn't like Lou. They didn't like how big football had become, and then Bob Davie was a guy that had kind of done some things behind Lou's back to be favored by the administration, and you know, I think those were all things that factored into it. That the talent level wasn't what it was before. So it was a lot of those things. It wasn't just one thing. It was all of it together. And then I've had some people tell me, and again, I was a little young at that time, but I've had some people tell me too that Lou, there were some things going on. He had some health issues. His wife, Beth, had some health issues during that time that I think distracted him. he was doing even more of the speaking engagement stuff. I think he kind of lost some of the fire for recruiting and didn't properly replace Vinny Serrato. So there were some things on Lou also that he could have done better from what some people have told me as well. But a lot of it was I just think the administration wasn't real thrilled with how big football had become and some of the things that had happened during Lou's tenure. So I think there's a lot of different factors that went into that. But what's funny is, the year after 1993, they went, I think, 6-5-1? I think is their record. Let me pull it up here real quick. 6-5-1. Yeah, 6-5-1. The next 2 years, they went 9-3 and 8-3 and finished in the top 20 both years. It's not like they were terrible. They just weren't as dominant as they had been because prior to that 94 season when they went 6-5-1, they went 12-0, 12-1, 9-3, 10-3, 10-1-1, 11-1. So in 8-3, 9-3 is not a whole lot different than what they did in 1990 and 1991. And of course, in 1996, they didn't play in a bowl game. And if they played in a bowl game, maybe they would have ranked higher. They were 10th in the last game of the year going into USC in 1996, his last year. Because that year they had beaten Texas, who was ranked number 6. They lost at home to Ohio State, who was really good that year. They beat number 16 Washington at home by 34. Then they lost to Air Force when they were ranked 8th. That dropped them to 19th. They blew out Navy, blew out Boston College, beat back-to-back last 2 home games of Lou Holtz's career, Trev. Last 2 games he ever coached in Notre Dame Stadium. They beat Pitt 60-6 and beat Rutgers 62-0. And then they went on the road. They were ranked 10th in his last game, played at USC, and lost in overtime, 27-20. That dropped them from 10 to 19. But they were 10th going into that. So they were not terrible his last 2 years. Had that one bad year. It's just they weren't as dominant. And they were noticeably not as athletic as the teams from like 88 to 93 as well. So I think all those things factored into it. There's a lot of things that went into it.
Mark Avalone, what do visiting football teams think about the single file tunnel?
They don't love it. And that was done intentionally. I can tell you that. I know I've been told that by several people that the little narrow walkway for teams to come in and out of their locker room was intentional. It was done on purpose. It's A, to funnel them right into the sideline, and then B, to make them have to walk single file getting out to the stadium. So I don't think they like it, but I don't think it's like this huge thing. It's not like, it's not like what some other places are. I've heard it's still a nice locker room and all that stuff, but yeah, they don't love it. I just think that's funny. I just think it's so hilarious how teams put so much thought into how can we make the locker room for the opponents uncomfortable. It's like, really, really, guys, this is what you're concerned about doing? Like, painting locker rooms pink or painting a beige or whatever, all these things that you hear about people. It's like, okay, whatever.
Andy, it just means more. True or false? Coach Marcus Freeman in his matchups with Georgia and Penn State had his team more prepared for the big moments than Brian Kelly ever did, and comparatively has outcoached Brian Kelly. I think that's a fairly easy true. We watched Notre Dame on those big stages under Brian Kelly. We watched him get thoroughly outcoached, and his team was thoroughly not as prepared as what Nick Saban had that 2012 Alabama team. Look, even if they were prepared, I think Alabama wins that game. I do. I just think that they had better talent. The 2012 season was magical, but you look at who was on that roster for Alabama. It's just, I think they were the more talented team. I truly do.
Shouldn't have been what it was, though.
Exactly. It shouldn't, and that's a testament to the preparation and being outcoached. And Brian Kelly, for a lack of better words, kind of shriveled up in big moments in big games.
And not just in the postseason.
Nope.
Stanford 2017, Miami 2017, Stanford 2015,
Michigan 2019,
Michigan 2019, Georgia 2019. Yeah. Your team had Georgia 2017. Your team had every chance to win both of those games, and you couldn't get it done.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's an easy no-brainer. Absolutely no-brainer.
Another one from Salty. Should the Big Ten and SEC collude to exert their power to control the college football playoff? Standardized scheduling and define college football playoff qualifications?
No. They do, but no, they shouldn't. They shouldn't have that kind of control, but they do. Yep. And it was given to them by the other leagues and ESPN, basically. But no, they shouldn't.
More broadly, should the future of college football be determined in the Big Ten and SEC boardrooms? Can this be avoided, and how?
No, it shouldn't. It's kind of the same answer. No, it shouldn't. I think the only way to fix it now is to basically blow the whole thing up. And college football breaks away from the NCAA. This is something I've never wanted, but I think it's the only way to really fix it, is to get it to break away from the NCAA and have some sort of leadership team that determines these things, that comes from the outside the leagues. And you could have some influence from inside the leagues. The problem with this is all these decision makers are coming from a standpoint of they're all battling for what's best for their league or their team. And there's nobody fighting for what's best for the game. Greg Sankey's job as the commissioner of the SEC is not to do what's best for college football. It's to do what's best for the SEC. Now, I don't like it. I don't like the way he goes about it. I think Tony Petitti drives me nuts, but you know what Tony Petitti's doing? His job. His job is to do what's best for the Big Ten. Doesn't matter if it's best for college football. That's why you need somebody over the conference commissioners. The conference commissioners should not in any way, shape, form, or fashion be the drivers of the future of the sport.
Yeah.
It should be somebody ahead of them. Their job is to, here's the framework. Now it's our job to do what we got to do to make sure that our conferences are thriving. Our teams in our conference are all thriving. And I think the only way you make that happen is you break away from the NCAA and somehow you have to convince them that it's good for them to give up their autonomy. And I don't know how you do that. I really don't know how you do that.
ESPN will launch its direct-to-consumer platform on August 24th. Are you willing to bring all your sports into the ESPN app and pay for it?
No. It's a pretty easy answer for me.
Fair enough. Muhammad Abdi, Brian, do you think the order of the schedule is a lot better than previous seasons, as it doesn't include back-to-back road games and the bye weeks are appropriately placed after week 1?
I love almost everything about this year's schedule, Trevor. Almost everything about this year's schedule. I think the bye weeks are relatively good. When you get 2 bye weeks, I don't have a problem with one being early in the season. I don't. I hate week 1 and week 2 and week 3 byes when that's the only one you get.
Yeah.
But they get the bye week between A&M and Miami, which I think is kind of a good thing. And then they've got another one in 5 more games, and then you've got 6 more games. And then you've got 5 games after that next one. I think that's perfectly structured. I love the fact, Mohammed, that there's not the back-to-back road games like you're talking about. And there's not even 2 really bad road games in 3 weeks. If you look at it, I mean, if you look at their 2025 schedule, they've got the long road trip to start the season against Miami, which is, again, not an easy trip. But Notre Dame doesn't go on the road again until later that month. They go on the road again on September 27th, almost a month later. They've got a bye, home, long road trip. Then you're home, bye, and then you go to Boston. Then you're home against Navy, and then your next trip is at Pitt. That like Boston is a long trip, and Stanford's an even longer trip. They're the bookends of a 5-game slate. It's road, home, road. But that road game right in the middle is one of the shorter trips you're going to ever take because you're playing Pitt. And the only games that are closer are like Ohio State, Michigan State, and Northwestern, Indiana, Purdue. Like, that's it. It's one of the closer games you're ever going to play. It's a real quick flight. And so the Boston trip and the Stanford trip are now broken up by 3 games, including 2 at home. Whereas in 2015, they played Boston one week and then Stanford the very next week. So you're going coast to coast in back-to-back weeks. They don't have that this year. The only thing I don't like about this year's schedule is that your first 2 games are against your 2 best opponents. I'm okay with one of them, but I would have liked to seen another one later. Or maybe give me a weaker team in week 2 and then a bye after A&M or something like that. I think that would have probably been something I would have preferred, but other than that, I think this is a very well put together schedule. There's really good teams on it. There's good depth on it. It's not too hard. It's not soft. It's a good schedule. And I think it was pretty well constructed. Pretty well
You also
constructed.
don't
Go
have
ahead.
back-to-back night games without a bye in between it. As of where the schedule stands now, the only potential that you have for that is Navy and then at Pitt if they decide that is a night game as well. Like they have back-to-back technically, like when you just look at the schedule, they have a night game against Miami and then they have a night game against Texas A&M, but there's a bye week in between that. Even let's just say, even if Boston College decides to be a night game, in between USC and Boston College, there's a bye week. Then you would be on the road against Boston College at night. Then you come back home and then play Navy at night. But I don't think that both of Boston College and Pitt would be night games. That would be brutal.
Mm-hmm. Agree. We had another super chat pop up. Here we go from my guy, Raymond Harton.
Appreciate the super chat, Raymond. Thank you, IB, Brian, Trevor, etc., for giving us a great community surrounding my beloved Irish. Life has been hard the past couple of months.
Yeah, Raymond, I know it's been real tough for you and your family, man, and we're still thinking about you and praying for you, but just keep battling, man, and I'm glad that we're here for you. I'm glad that you still stick around, and we can give you some chances to get your mind off of things, but we appreciate you, man, very, very much.
Domer Grizz, happy Friday. Is Sider's focus on the big picture is exactly what our talented running backs need to be even more elite than we thought they could be? How much better can they really be this year? Can't wait.
Let's see. I think this could either be a brilliant strategy or a one that creates some issues. Because to a degree, I kind of want running backs focusing on what running backs are supposed to do. I don't need them thinking big picture. I want them doing their job. But with Jeremiah Love, because you can use him in so many ways, it kind of makes sense for him to know more. So we'll see. Does he put more on them than they can handle? And then they mentally think too much? Or is it a perfect strategy? I don't know the answer. It sounds great. I think it sounds great, but I just need to see it. And the thing I like about it is he has a very clear vision of what he wants to accomplish with this, which helps you teach it when you know what you're trying to accomplish. Why are you doing it this way? He's not doing it to be different to Dean McCullough or show that I'm better than Dean. It's just, look, this is what I think is the next level for these kids. There's not a whole lot. I'd rather him do this than reinvent the wheel as running. Hey, I know that this is the footwork that McCullough told you to do, and I know how this I taught you to read, but I'm going to do it my way. Well, no, the foundation's pretty flipping good. So how can I develop this group to make them even better without changing all the things they're already really good at? Well, here's why. Let's look at it from a big picture standpoint. All right. I think that could help them in pass pro, could help them in the pass game. I think it'd help them better understand maybe, certain cuts that they might need to make. Certainly. Plus the fact they're going to be more experienced after last year. But the foundation that Dylan McCullough laid was phenomenal. And now his job is to say, okay, how do we get this group to take their game to the next level? There's some risk in how he's doing it. But if it works out and he's right in his evaluation of that need, then it's going to pay off in a big way also.
Johnny from the boot. What is your favorite fall camp play in memory for Notre Dame? Mine is Sheldon Day tossing Mike McGlinchey in one-on-ones.
I don't know if there's a favorite, if I have a favorite play. There's some favorite takeaways, and they happened within a year of each other. In 2017, and I talked about this last week, I'm not exaggerating when I say I was like, I don't know how I feel about this, because I'm watching the offense go for 50-yard run after 50-yard run after 50-yard run against the first-team defense. And I'm thinking either this O-line is crazy good or this defense might even be worse than it was under Brian Big Order, because they are getting destroyed by this offensive line. And it got to the point where you're like, they can't be this bad. It's got to be the O-line. And you found out that's exactly what it was, because that defensive line was pretty solid that year. And then in 2018, we're watching Miles Boykin just dominate Julian Love, like rep after rep, drill after drill. Ian Book's just throwing it up, and Miles Boykin, who's like a half a foot taller than Julian Love, just keeps going up and beating him for the ball. Just beat him like a drum. And I was like, wow. Like, okay, this is going to be the breakout for Miles Boykin was so obvious after watching fall camp. You're like, if he's doing that to Julian Love, who's going to guard him this year? And then, of course, he comes against Michigan right away and has a big game. And you're like, okay, cool. Because forget, he had that big game against Michigan, but they called back a touchdown for him in that game. Remember when they had the illegal formation? If they don't have that penalty, they blow Michigan out in that opener. Blow them out. Because I think it was 21-10, I think was the score. And that would have made it 28-10. And it would have never been close again after that. What say you, Trev? Do you really have one? I mean, you watch videos.
Yeah, I mean,
it's camps, I would imagine.
It's tough because my sample size for this is so small. I mean, I guess my favorite memory is just being there on July 31st, getting to see the team that up close. But I mean, favorite play, no, I mean, I see the videos and clips that come out, but it just doesn't do it justice as opposed to being there in person. So that'd probably be mine.
Fair.
Paul Hamilton, rank these Notre Dame quarterbacks: Book, Cone, Buckner, Pine, Hartman, Leonard, and Angeli.
Book, Cone, Buckner, Pine, Hartman. I mean, I'd go Leonard 1, Book 2, Cone 3, Hartman 4, Buckner 5, Pine 6, and Angeli 7. I mean, Angeli never started a game at Notre Dame. I don't know how you can put him anywhere but 7th. Well, he came off the bench okay, great. He led him to a field goal drive. That's awesome. Like Drew Pine led Notre Dame to a 35-14 win over number 4 Clemson. They went 8-2 as a starter with your starter out. I mean, if Drew Pine doesn't go 8-2 as a starter, now it's, he was not the driver of that, but like, how does Marcus Freeman's tenure start if they go, say, 6-4 and finish the regular season? That would have made him 6-6? How does the season go? How does recruiting go if that's the case? Was the starter for a road win over Syracuse, who was ranked at the time. Started in a game where his team blew out Drake May's team. You know what I mean? Like, sorry, I just have to put Drew Pine above Steve Angeli. Now, do I think Steve Angeli is a more talented quarterback than Drew Pine? Of course. But Steve Angeli started, a bowl game against a depleted Oregon State team. Okay, great. That'd be my order, Trev. What say you? What's your order?
Yeah, I'm the same. I guess my question would be, like, rank them based on what? Like their career at Notre Dame, how much I liked them. I mean, yeah, that's probably my order. Leonard 1, Book 2, Cone, Hartman, Buckner, Pine, then Angeli. If we're talking about, like, enjoying watching them play, I'm probably going to put Pine last. I'm sorry, I did not have fun in 2022. That was a rough year. So, like, for quarterback play, in my opinion.
Sure.
So
yeah, I'm saying it wasn't rough. I'm not saying Drew Pine's a phenomenal player, but to me, a 21-point win over Clemson is far more impressive than a 30-point win over Oregon State, and that's the only thing that Steve Angeli really did as a starting quarterback. So, Steve Angeli was on that team, and he was behind Drew Pine. Actually, sorry, that's the one from Raymond earlier. This is from ND Milton fan.
Thank you for the super chat. Film study is critical for maximizing performance. Will you rank which position group needs the most film study from greatest to least?
Need the most film? I mean, honestly, I think they all need it a ton. I would say the three that it's most important is O-line, quarterback, and linebacker. And then safety would be my second one on defense. That's probably, if I had to rank them, those would be the four. The top. I mean, it's vitally important for all of them, but those would be the ones that I would say. Let's say that Chief Brody said the Angeli drive against Penn State mattered more to me than any game Pine played in. I get that. You don't like Drew Pine, but I don't know how you could say leading someone on a field goal drive is more important than a guy who started in the game against a top 5 team and won by 21 points. Like, I'm sorry. You got 3 points. 3 points. Like, we have turned that into the same as Joe Montana's drive against Houston in the Cotton Bowl. Like, we've turned that into this. He threw a bunch of checkdowns and a slant route. Like, I love what he did. I love the poise he showed. My issue is not with Steve. It's that people turn this into something like, oh, my God, this is just some, it's like, this is Frank Reich coming off the bench for an injured, Jim Kelly and leading him to a 34-point come-from-behind playoff win of the Oilers. That's not what that was. So, look, to your point, Trev, I get it. The 22 teams that season was rough. I get all that. But, like, to say that was better than anything Drew Pine did, Drew Pine went on the road and outdueled Drake May. Didn't just win the game. Drew Pine shredded North Carolina in that game. Like, we kind of, as Notre Dame fans, sometimes forget that. Like, Drew Pine didn't just like the Clemson game, Trev, you could point to and say, dude went 9 of 17 for 85 yards. Like, they didn't win that game because Drew Pine. Fair. Very fair. He went 24 of 34 for 289 yards and 3 touchdowns in a win over Drake May in North Carolina. You got to give him some love for that one. He went 22 of 28 for 262 yards and 3 touchdowns in a win over BYU. You got to give him some love for that one. So I just, I'm sorry. What he did against USC was more impressive than what was done in the bowl game the next year when he threw for over 300 yards and had like an 80% completion rate against USC, a top 10 USC team who was a 1 game away from making the playoff. So, we do nothing but dismiss Drew Pine. I'm not talking about you, Trev. You're dismissing that season. And we're going to say that a guy coming off the bench and leading a team to a field goal drive is somehow better than a guy going on the road and outplaying Drake May, or a guy being a starting quarterback for a team that beat a top 5 team by 21 points. I don't see how we can do that. It doesn't.
No, I'm
make
with
sense
you.
to me.
It comes down to just remembering how the season went.
Right.
I mean,
again, I'm more pushing back against this comment than your point. I understand where you're coming from. You're putting all the 22 stuff at the bottom of that list.
No, yeah.
I get that.
Yeah.
I get that. I get that. But, like, have we forgot that that what he did at North Carolina? I mean, that was one of the better quarterback performances of the Brian Kelly, of the Marcus Freeman era, was his performance at North Carolina that year against Drake May. And that North Carolina team did not suck. That North Carolina team that year, Trev, won 9 games. So I just don't know how we can look at that and be like, that's not as impressive as a field goal drive in a playoff game. Were the stakes higher? Sure, the stakes were higher. Was that more impressive than what Drew Pine did for an entire game against North Carolina or BYU? No, it wasn't. It wasn't. So that's my thing about that. Saying that drive mattered more to you. Okay, it mattered more to you from the standpoint of it was a bigger moment, but it shouldn't put him in a ranking ahead of Drew Pine. So that's my takeaway for that. But I just hope we don't have to live through many more quarterback years like that.
I would be shocked
in the future. Yeah,
that would
be very depressing. Very depressing. Makes me want to cry just thinking about it. I don't want to live through that again and again.
Oh my goodness. No, that would be terrible.
It's brutal.
Johnny from the boot, with the loaded running back room outside 11 price, what year would have the other running backs maybe have been the star or starting back of?
Freshman, sophomore years. I mean, there's a lot of years where Aeneas Williams is a legit number 2 the minute he steps foot on campus, if not a 1 by the end of the season. There's a lot of years that's also true for Kedron Young. There's a lot of years where Aeneas and Kedron are starters by year 2, like where they are right now, including kind of recently.
Yeah.
So I would say like their minimum in the 2 deep the minute they step a foot on campus in most years. Most years we're like, okay, how much is Nolan James going to play this year? Like Notre Dame certainly would have loved to have Nolan James as a freshman in 2019 when they had all those running back depth issues. But this, like, to his point, this team is so loaded. But like these are year 1, year 2 players. Like all of them are year 1, year 2 players. The only guy that would have been the exception for me is Jabron Payne because he was dealing with so many injuries. I didn't know what he was going to be coming into Notre Dame, how healthy he was going to be. He was injured as a junior. He was missed like kind of half his year as a senior, didn't play that well. How's he going to be? I don't know. But all the other guys would have been year 1, year 2 players, except Jabron's the only exception, but his was more injury related than it was he's not good enough.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
it's crazy to think about, Trev.
I mean, I think an argument could be made that any one of those running backs would have started in 2018 before Dex came back. Like, I don't know if they transitioned Jafar Armstrong as willingly as they did, I guess you could say. But, yeah, definitely an argument to be made.
Chief has a follow-up to that. He says, I got another one. I got another. Number 1, Aeneas Williams greater than Tony Jones plus Jafar Armstrong.
If this was a buy-sell hold, I would hold it. I need more of. I mean, we got an entire season of Tony Jones as a starting running back essentially in 19, and Aeneas, we just haven't seen him. Like from a skill set standpoint,
if we're talking talent, I would say I'm good with that. It's the number throwing in Jafar on there is the kind of thing that gives me a little bit of pause. But I would be comfortable with that. I'd be comfortable with that. I'd be comfortable saying that Aeneas is a better talent than Tony, and if given the opportunity, could produce like Tony did. But that's a projection, whereas we know what Tony did. And if Tony doesn't get hurt in the middle of that year, he's a 1,000-yard rusher. And Tony had a better yards per average, a significantly better yards per carry average that year than Kyron Williams did the next 2 years. He was almost at 6. He was like 5.9 something, where Kyron's best year was 5.2. He was a 4.9 in 2021. Now, a big part of him being at 4.9 in 2021 was the offensive line he ran behind. But even with that really good 2020 offensive line, he only averaged 5.2 yards a carry.
Yeah.
So, if we're talking about taking Aeneas over both of them individually, that's a no-brainer. Taking them over 2, because 2 to 1, you're going to need 2 backs through the course of a season. But I'm like, if you were to say, I'll take it a little bit further, Chief, and say, would you take Aeneas and Kedron if they're healthy, or Aeneas and Nolan James, pick either one of them, and give me any combination of 2? I'm going to take those duos over almost any other duos that we've seen. Some exceptions would be like Audric and Logan in 2022. Thinking of like Dexter in 2018 with Tony was pretty good, but like 2017, you could say, well, would you take that over Dexter and Josh? Well, depends, because there was a lot of weeks we didn't have Dexter. Like when he was healthy, sure, he was pretty good, but like 2016, that'd have been a good duo. 2015 with all the injuries, that'd have been a pretty good duo. You had to move a receiver out, into the backfield that year. 2014, certainly. So that just speaks to the talent that this group has. Absolute talent this group has.
Domer Grizz, is there a chance one of the quarterbacks might crack under the pressure of a prolonged competition? Might one of them start pressing more the longer it goes on, for example?
Is there a chance? Sure. There's a chance. That's always a possibility. And that's one of the things you learn about a longer competition. There's downside to it, because then whoever wins the competition doesn't get as many reps, but you certainly kind of learn who's going to really handle the pressure the more it goes. I don't know how much pressure these quarterbacks are facing. Obviously there's the outside of the battle, because like we don't get to see him again, and there's not going to be like, we're not going to be the scrimmages and we're not going to see him take another rep of – we're not going to get to see him probably throw against a defense the rest of fall camp unless it's a one-on-one. So it's that's why I kind of said it might actually be good to have more media availability this fall camp to put them under the spotlight a little bit and see what they're made of.
Yeah, I'll say this. If one of them does crack under pressure, then I think the coaching staff kind of has their answer of who the starter will be then. I mean, look, this quarterback competition is high pressure. It is, but it's not going to compare to being the starting quarterback at Notre Dame and playing at Miami. It's close to it's the closest thing they're going to get until they get live game reps. But if you crack under the pressure of battling to be the starter, then what is it going to be like if you have to then handle the pressure of being a starter? And so I think that was glass half full. You would get your answer of who your starting quarterback would be. John A1, what is CJ Carr's off-platform playmaking potential?
It's pretty good, and we've actually seen that in some of the blue gold games. Especially his freshman year, he made a couple really nice on-the-move throws. When I think of off-platform, I think of either A, having to change your arm angle, or B, having to get out of the pocket or moving around. Trev, we saw him, and I keep saying, I don't remember if this was the blue gold game or the jersey scrimmage of his freshman year, but there was a play because I was sitting in the same seat for both of them. So, like, for me, I can remember it, but I don't remember which one it was. There's a play where he gets pressured and he has to step into the pocket, avoid the pressure, and then he bangs a dig cut to Cam Williams for a big play. Like, that to me is off platform. I think of the sprint outs he had in scrambles in his freshman year blue gold game. I think of the play he made to Jeremiah Love in the practice we were at, where he gets pressured, he rolls out, keeps his eyes downfield. They turn Jeremiah Love loose. He finds him, hits him over the top for a big gain. So I think he's got that ability. He doesn't have the running ability that Kenny has, but he's not super far off. Like, you saw it in the practice we were at. CJ's a good athlete. And he had plenty of plays like that in high school where he'd make throws down the field on the run and things like that. So he's got plenty of playmaking potential. Is he going to look like Lenore Sellers when things break down? No. But can he be a playmaker when things aren't like CJ's not this, like, he's not Jack Cohn. He's got to have a perfect pocket, and he's smart, and he's just going to be accurate. But if things don't go his way, that's not who CJ Carr is. He can move around, he can run. You can throw bootlegs with him. You can throw sprint outs with him. You can ask him to do stuff off script. When he starts scrambling around, receivers are going to know, get open, because he'll be able to find you. And if they don't get open and the defense stays deep, then he can take off and run and hurt you. Is he going to look like Riley Leonard? No, he's not, but he can hurt you with his legs. Like, I'll be shocked if CJ Carr's, if he's the starter, I'll be shocked if he's not at least plus 200 in rushing this year.
Double bogey like a champ, using one player from each Power 4 conference and one group of 5-player build a secondary of 2 corners, 2 safeties, and a nickel. For example, Caleb Downs safety, then one from the Big 12, SEC, etc.
Oh my goodness. Well, you gave me one. Give me Caleb Downs as one safety. Can I use Notre Dame guys? I'm going to use Notre Dame guy. So it's 5 guys, and Notre Dame's either P4 or independent P4. They're a group of 5. So I'll go Leonard Moore at one corner spot. I'm going to go outside the box a little bit, and I'm going to move somebody. I'm going to take D'Angelo Pons and make him a nickel.
Okay.
So that's, oh no, he's a Big Ten. Those are 2 Big Ten guys. Can't do that one. ACC, I got to find. So if I got to get somebody from the ACC, I'll get Avian Terrell corner, put him opposite Leonard Moore. So I got Downs, Moore, and him.
Terrell.
So Terrell. Let me think. So I got to get somebody from the SEC and the Big 12. So I got to get a nickel from one of those leagues, and I got to get a safety from one of those leagues. There's a couple safeties in the Big 12 I like. Let me go to my Big 12 page here and get my memory refreshed. But there's a couple Big 12 safeties that I thought were pretty good players coming into the season. The nickel one, Trev, is a little bit of a challenge for me. I'm trying to think of because I can't use a Notre Dame guy. So give me a second here. Let's go Big 12. Let's go Xavier Alford. It's for Arizona State. Oh no, he plays corner, doesn't he? Hold on a second. Let me see here. Arizona State. Let me see depth chart. No, he's a safety. So I get Xavier Alford from Arizona State as safety. That's my Big 12 rep. And then my nickel. Who's the best? Let me see here. Well, is the what's the name of that corner from Tennessee that's been hurt? Oh shoot. Oh man. His first name starts with a J. I'm drawing a blank here. Give me a second. I'm gonna look this up.
Jermod McCoy.
But there you go. I'll move him to nickel. How about that? And that's my league. That's my team. How about them apples?
I like it.
Work for you? Okay.
Works for me because I cannot think of a nickel from the Big 12. So
yeah.
Shout out to you for that.
Or a good one. So yeah.
It's a good question.
All right. It's a fun one. Make you think, make me look stuff up. Just to show I don't pull all this stuff out from the top of my head. I got to look stuff up. And, when I'm talking about like numbers for guys from 1990, that's not coming from memory. I'm not loose emoji. I'm looking it up. I mean, I remember it being a big game, but I have to actually look up the data on that one. So, yeah.
Bobby L, 18 out of the last 20 years preseason. There has been a preseason top 10 team that ended up unranked. Who do you think is this year's team? I mean, I guess if we just go based off of the coaches poll, because the AP poll isn't out yet, I have to go through and I have to look at who started ranked in the coaches poll because I don't know.
While you're looking that up, Trev, we were asked this the other day, and I went with LSU and Miami.
Yeah, Miami is mine. Likely of the top 10 teams that have ranked per the coaches poll. Now, AP poll, it could be a little bit different, but if we're going on the coaches poll, my pick is Miami for that.
Yeah, I think LSU also has a chance just because their schedule's so much tougher.
Mm-hmm.
But those are the two that are pretty easy for me.
Broke neck boy Brian Terminator went back in time to stop Stanford from having a football team. How would that affect Notre Dame's history, other school history, championships, etc.?
All right. Well, let's assume that the team that they replaced Stanford with is one that they beat, right? It actually impacts Notre Dame a lot when it comes from championships. And I'm not just talking about the Brian Kelly era where Stanford was beating them so much. In 1990, Notre Dame went 9-3. They were ranked number 1 and lost at home to Stanford, who was 5-6. 2 weeks later, they beat number 2 Miami. How does that season change if they're undefeated going into Penn State on November 17th? The game they lost by 3 at home. Who knows? We'll see. 1992, Notre Dame finished the year ranked number 4 in the AP poll. They go 10-1-1. They tied Michigan in week 2. Michigan was ranked number 6. That Michigan team finished the year ranked number 5. Michigan went. Do you know that Michigan went undefeated in 1992? Did you know that, Trevor?
I did not.
Problem is they tied 3 games that year. So one of them was with Notre Dame. Notre Dame that year tied number 6 Michigan. They went 9-0-3. That's what I hated about that era of college football. There should never been ties. They beat number 9 Boston College in November. They beat number 9 Boston College 54-7. They beat number 22 Penn State 17-16. They went on the road and beat number 19 USC 31-23. And then they beat number 4 Texas A&M 28-3 in the Cotton Bowl. But do you know why Notre Dame didn't play for the championship that year? Because number 18 Stanford beat them 33-16 in Notre Dame Stadium. That was their only loss of the season. Ooh. So you look at that year, and that is absolutely a season in which Notre Dame has a chance to win a championship again. But Stanford beat them. Then you have to look at the Brian Kelly era. And I think Brian Kelly was very much negatively impacted by how good Stanford was. Because Stanford started getting good right when Brian Kelly got to Notre Dame. So it's like there's not a lot he could have done to stunt it. They were good in his first year. That team that beat Virginia Tech in the Orange Bowl that year. And then in 2011, I was talking with a guy the other day. I was on a show, and I don't know if he's released the segment out, but he had me on talking Notre Dame football, and we were talking. I think this part was off the air. like when we weren't recording, but we were talking about 2011 and how I thought that Oklahoma State got screwed that year. I've said this before. They should have played for the title, not Alabama. Alabama lost at home 9-6 to LSU. They did not deserve a rematch that year. Oklahoma State did. But I said, I'll be honest with you, by the end of the year, I think the two best teams in the country that year played in the Fiesta Bowl. And that was that last Andrew Luck Stanford team and Oklahoma State. That's what Brian Kelly walked into at Notre Dame. And so, of course, it's established program, Jim Harbaugh. They start beating Notre Dame on the recruiting trail. They beat him for Alex Carter. They beat him for Justin Reed. They beat him for, I'm trying to remember the kid's name from Florida, the safety they beat him for, Ben Edwards, I think is his name. They beat him for Paulson Adebo. I mean, I think I talked about this a couple weeks ago, Trev, but Paulson Adebo basically was like, if Stanford gets me into school, I'm going to Stanford. This is a Notre Dame commit saying this.
Wild.
They beat him for Josh Garnett. They beat him for Andrews Pete. They beat him constantly for big-time players, and Notre Dame would have gotten a decent number of those guys had it not been for Stanford. So I think Brian Kelly's rosters would have looked a lot different if it wasn't for Stanford. They would have. And I think that factors into how good Notre Dame could be. So certainly Stanford has impacted Notre Dame. Now, it's been in small windows, early 90s, the 2010s. Outside of that, Notre Dame has dominated that series. But it still is impactful, in my opinion. I mean, what if Notre Dame beat Stanford convincingly at the end of the 2015 season and their only loss is to a really tight, close loss to Clemson? Who knows?
Let Stanford drive the length of the field with 30 seconds left. Kick a field goal.
I mean, who knows? And they wouldn't have played Stanford. Let's say they'd have played UCLA and beat them by 30. I mean, who knows how that season would have gone? So I absolutely think Stanford has had an impact on Notre Dame. There's been some years where beating Stanford has helped Notre Dame. 2012. That win over Stanford was absolutely the thing that vaulted that team to being what they were. Because that was the dragon they had never slayed. Manti Te'o was a senior at Notre Dame in 2012. He had never played in a game where they beat Stanford. They beat him in 2009 out at Stanford. They killed him in 2010. They beat him in 2011 by 2 touchdowns. He had the only competitive game he'd been in against Stanford was his freshman year when Stanford beat him. I think it was like 45-38, something like that. Remember that game where Jimmy Clausen?
That game was crazy.
That was a nutty game. Last of the Charlie Weiss era. And then they blew him out. I think it was 37-10, and then they beat him like 28-14 the next year. This is the only time he ever beat him. And they needed a goal line stand in overtime to do that. But that team was different coming out of that game. Notre Dame was a different team coming out of that game. They were way more confident. So it hasn't all been negative either. I think there's been some positives coming out of that series as well. Just a lot more negatives than positives when you consider how often Stanford took really good players from them in the early 2010s. So, yeah, it's an interesting question. Very interesting question.
Diving into part 3 of the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by the FanDuel Sportsbook, part of the Believe Network. Benjamin Weiss, the mailbag question in here. With the rapid evolution of the safety position physically, is there potential for this to backfire, or is this evolution all positive and merely a result of higher caliber recruiting work? Thank you.
Benjamin, first of all, I still want to say thanks again. Benjamin showed up at our tailgate early a few years ago and helped my parents and I set up the tailgate. So I've not forgotten that. So I do still appreciate that very much. But the rapid evolution of the safety position, is there potential for this to backfire, or is the evolution all positive and merely a result of higher caliber recruiting work? I don't know what the positive would or the negative would be. Like, I don't know what the backfire would look like, Benjamin. I'd be curious to kind of hear from you when you talk about could it backfire. What are you referring to? Are you thinking maybe like you say the evolution of it physically? Is there potential to backfire? Are you saying like maybe the additional length is problematic? Could it create some issues with them from if you're a bunch of 6'4", 6'5" safeties, are they going to be good tacklers? Can they get low enough? Can they play with good enough leverage? Is that kind of what you're referring to? If it is, then I'd say no. I don't think it's going to backfire. The only thing it backfires if you have misses, which is true if you recruit a bunch of 5'11" guys. I think they're recruiting athletes that fit well into what they're trying to do. That's ultimately the key. Mike Mickens isn't taking 6'5" guys and 6'4" guys just because he wants tall guys. He loves length and all that, but he's not taking. There's been some taller, longer guys that have liked Notre Dame that he didn't go after because they couldn't flip their hips real well. They were a little tight hip. They didn't play with good pad level. They weren't strong tacklers. I think the fact that you're seeing them, they're great football players. They can get low. They can tackle. They are strong tacklers at the prep level, things like that. I think they're good fits. And that's kind of where I'm at. That's where I'm at.
Super chat from Conrad. Appreciate the super chat. Does it concern you that a quarterback has not stood out?
Why are we assuming that a quarterback has not stood out? Is this being reported somewhere? Because we've been at one full practice. Other than that, we've been at partial practices where we literally have not seen the ball hit the ground but for a couple times. So I've seen people on the message board say this. I've had people email me and say, hey, I've literally been asked this question 5 times, either via DM, email, or on the message board in the last 24 hours. So I don't know if somebody's reporting this or not. How would they know? They were told something by somebody who heard it from somebody else. Like, how would you know? We're just finished the week of practice, period. Like, today is technically the beginning of a new week because they already not had a practice. They didn't practice on, I think, Monday because they had the night practice on Sunday. What does it mean that they're not standing out? Like, where's this coming from? So I'm not concerned about it because what I've seen, I'm happy with.
Also, why are we assuming that it's a negative? Like somebody hasn't stood out because they're just both playing that poorly? I mean, if somebody hasn't stood out, like maybe it's the same conversation as the linebacker room. I brought this up to a buddy the other day. It's like, hey, do you think it's a little weird nobody stood out at will, considering, they have Kingston and Jalen Sneed and Jaden Osbury? It's like, no, because I think they're all playing at an extremely high level. It could also be that. You know what I'm saying? Like it's not just, oh gosh, they're just so bad that there's not going to be a quarterback breakout. It's maybe they're both competing at a very high level that it's coming to fruition. That's going to be a difficult decision.
I just think it's a story. So we got to say something on it. Got to say something. A week into fall camp, a freshman and a redshirt freshman and a redshirt sophomore is, what are we doing here? Is this what we're going to do all fall camp? Just this type of stuff. So yeah, I don't get it. I don't know who's saying it. I don't know where it's coming from. I don't really care where it's coming from, because if you're not seeing it with your own eyes, then, who are you talking to? I promise you this isn't coming from like Mike Denbrock and Gino Gaduli, or better not be, or Marcus Freeman. So I don't know where it's coming from. I don't know who's saying it. I don't really care. I think it's just camp fodder because we don't have a lot of access. That's the way I look at it. So I appreciate a super chat, but I don't really care what the quarterbacks are doing in week 1. We told you guys that we weren't going to really hear anything until we get into like week 2. We're not there yet. So we do this every year. Every year there's something that gets reported by somebody else about this is going to be a concern. That's going to be a concern. Let's see where we're at in a couple weeks. Maybe it is a concern. Maybe it isn't. I don't know. But I think focusing on that in week 1 is just kind of, in my opinion, for me, other people can do whatever they want with their sites. This isn't a shot at anybody reporting that. I'm just telling you what I think. I think it's absolutely pointless to be having overreactions to what 2 young quarterbacks battling for a job are doing in the first week of fall camp. So Riley Leonard looked pretty rough early in the first week of fall camp last year, and things worked out okay with him. It is what it is. So I knew somebody reported it because of how often I've been asked it last week. I knew somebody had put it out there. But and then I also don't know if that's actually what they're saying, because I've had people say things, hey, did you hear that, Tim Priester said such and such? And then I'm like, where did he say that? And they tell me, and then I go listen to what Tim said. I'm like, that's not what he said. Like, that's your interpretation of what he said, but that's not what he said. That's happened to me where people say, well, did you hear Driscoll did this, this, and this? And I'm like, that's not what I said. Or I said those words, but I was saying it in a way that I don't know what's being said. And I don't like responding to what specifically, hey, did you hear what this guy said? I don't know what he said. And I don't know what context he said it in. Maybe he was being sarcastic. I have no clue. Because somebody could say, hey, neither of the two quarterbacks are standing out from the other. And to your point, Trevor, they may have meant it like they're both battling their butts off and playing well. But then when people hear that, same thing like when people are like CJ Carr takes parts of stretch and throws by himself, and then we turn into this giant thing that's so stupid and irrelevant that got to have something to talk about, but there's like no context to this. So I don't know what's being said or the context of what's being said. And so, those people can speak for themselves. I can speak for myself. What I saw in the most recent practice we were at was guys throwing pretty well against air. Great. That's all I've seen. So I'm not going to sit there and tell you this is who's winning the battle. I don't care right now. Let's talk again after Sunday. Let's see how we're doing. Let's get to next week and see how it's going. So that's where I'm at. It's just whatever. It's very annoying.
Yeah.
Very annoying. Oh,
Patrick Earwood, if 2021 had this year's offensive line, what would have changed?
I think Kyron Williams would have been a lot more effective running the football. Yeah. And I think that's the biggest thing for me. We were talking about that earlier. Kyron averaged 4.9 yards per carry in 2020. Like, that ain't good. Now, Kyron was never going to be a consistent, home run back. And I know he had the 91-yarder, but that was not your typical – he was a grinder. And like I said, even in 2020, I said 5.2 earlier. I'm sorry, he was 5.3. Chris Tyree was at 6.8. In 2021, he averaged 4.9 yards per carry. I'm pretty confident that he would have been up to around 5'4", 5'5", potentially in his – because he would have been a year older than he was in 2020. That was his first year as a starter. He would have been more effective that year for sure. I think Kyron's at least at 1,200 yards that season, at least, in my opinion. I think Jack Cohn would have been a lot better that year, and probably, the pass pro needs to get better than what it was last year. Last year was still way better than 2021, in my opinion. So I think Jack Cohn would have been better, and I think Kyron Williams would have been much more effective. Like, that running back group of Kyron, Chris Tyree, Logan Diggs would have been pretty nasty in 2021 if they had this offensive line. Absolutely. Yeah. What say you, Trevor?
No, agreed. I would say if the 2021 team had this year's O-line, be better. I also think the wide receiver room would be a close second. One of the reasons why they couldn't move the ball against Cincinnati is receivers couldn't get open. For all the numbers that Kevin Austin put up, he was kind of a ghost in big games.
Yeah. Against teams with good secondaries. Yes, absolutely.
But then you give Jack Cohn, Malachi Fields, Jaden Greathouse, Will Pauling, Jordan Faison, and Michael Mayer.
I got one for you, Trevor, since we're having some fun with some hypotheticals. In 2021, you can only give them one position group from the offense. You can only either give them the O-line or give them the receiving core. Which one do you choose? It's a tough one. Would this receiving core have been good enough to overcome the offensive line? Would this offensive line be good enough to overcome that receiving core?
I'm going to say I'm going to go wide receiver. Maybe the unpopular pick, but I go back and I think if the season played out the way that it did, you're not going to convince me that this wide receiving room was going to have more of a difficult time getting open against Cincinnati's secondary than what the 2021 receiving room did. And then part of the issue against Oklahoma State, they just ran out of gas. Yeah. They had 3 or 4 scholarship wide receivers healthy for that game.
Yeah, Lorenzo Styles went for 100 yards that game. Chris Tyree had 100 yards out of the backfield. Kevin Austin had some big plays late. And, Avery Davis was hurt. Deion Colsey, I think, was played. But, they were thin. I'm going to still take the O-line because I think with Kyron out of the backfield, with Michael Mayer, with Kevin Austin, with Lorenzo Styles, Deion Colsey, and just the overall depth at tight end, and Jack Cohn with a better run game, I think that receiving core would have been better as well. because I still think the offensive line would have just punished. Jack Cohn still would have gotten punished. Even if the receiver's getting open, is he going to have time to throw it? That would be my. But it's not a great scenario either way. It's very interesting to consider what that would have been. Very interesting.
Because on one hand, you have, on one hand, it's like with that offensive line, they still went 11-1 in the regular season, which is tough.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like they did have those receivers, but then it's like, would that offensive line have made Deion Colsey see the field more? Or would it have elevated Lorenzo Styles' play to where he was an effective part of that offense? But then on the flip side of the coin, it's like with the receivers, it's like, would Jack Cohn have had enough time? Would you have had a run game to support it? That's tough. Yeah, that's tough. Super chat from Greg Lisman Jr. Appreciate the super chat, Greg. Hey, Brian and Trevor, thank you for helping me get through my 3-mile run. Good for you. IB is the best. Listen, Greg, the next time I go on a 3-mile run will be the first time I go on a 3-mile run. So hats off to you, buddy.
Since my college days, man, when I had to do stuff like that for football. Yes. Somebody said, Fighting Mike said, I listened to their pod and didn't think anything of what they said. This is a zero burger. That's exactly what I'm saying, Fighting Mike. Like, you're getting people's read into that. But if someone's already emotional about the quarterback decision and they say something like nobody's standing out, some people are going to take that as like, well, yeah, a week into it. Or some people are going to take it as both of them are playing great. And some people are going to take that as, holy crap, quarterbacks suck. And so said they suck. That's the whole point of responding to what other people say. Like, I don't now. The only thing that I know has been reported that bothers me is the bull crap about Tyler Buckner. I mean, about CJ Carr throwing during stretch. Like, I had a former Notre Dame player reach out to me, and he's talking to me about it. He's like, I don't think it should be a big story, but this is a problem. Well, when I told him it's not the entire time, he just does it at the end, like towards like the second half of stretch. He's like, well, that's different. But that wasn't how it was portrayed. It was he just goes down there and throws during stretch. And what's funny is when we're at practice, we're talking about like why he's doing it. Like, well, it makes sense. He's kind of getting his arm loose with the elbow injuries from last year. But we're like, dude, he's throwing some dimes. Nobody had a problem with it. Do you think if Marcus Freeman or any coach had an issue with it, if team leadership had an issue with it, that he'd be doing it? Of course not. But we've got to create some drama. We've got to create something for people to click on and talk about during fall camp when we don't have a lot of access. So it's kind of like it's a double-edged sword for Notre Dame, because part of it's like, this is why they don't let us to more practices, because you have too many people in the media. Like the days of the Samojis and the Tim Priesters being the dominant sources of writing for Notre Dame are gone, where there's an attempt to, here's what we saw, this is the news, now it's what can we say that's going to gin people up so we can get our clicks. That's what it's turned into. And so it's like, why would I want to let you come to more of this so I get more of that? The flip side is, if you gave us more access, we could then say, okay, well, like, look, this is what's going on or whatever. You could then allow other people to drive more of the narrative, and we can make the conversations about the real stuff. But it's kind of like they're in a catch-22, because it's like there's always going to be something at fall camp that if you're looking to spin something into a narrative to get clicks for ad revenue, you're going to find something. And so I don't envy in Notre Dame in that instance. Like, it's almost like, look, screw you guys. We're just going to not let you at any practices because of the stupidity that some of you want to report on. That's nothing. People that break rules, they say, look, got very clear rules. This is what you can and can't do. And there's always this one guy that's just always doing things to push the boundaries. And it's like, you're punishing us because him. Just take his credential away. But there's always somebody looking to stir something up, because today you don't make money on good, honest reporting. You don't make money doing it the way that Lou Samoji and Tim Priester did it when I was a kid. You make money now by making some outlandish claim that gets a million social media hits. That's how you make money now. It's not about your reputation of being honest and integrity. It's about, are you generating clicks? Sadly, that's how a lot of young people think. That's how I make a name for myself. You want to know why that idiot at Michigan acts the way he does? That's why. Because it works in this social media world. But people, you could say this one thing, and three different people are going to hear it. They're going to have three completely different reactions to it. And then it goes on social media and spreads like wildfire. That's just the reality of it. And so that's why I'm not getting into that stuff. So sorry, but thank you for pointing that out, Fighting Mike. And you're probably not alone, but also sadly, the people who are having the overreaction to it are also not alone, and they're overreacting to it. And that's unfortunately where we are. I got my rant in for the day, Trev.
Bang.
Yeah. Ugh. Yeah. Speaking of Fighting Mike, let's get to this one.
More total touchdowns by Notre Dame running backs or the combined total of sacks and interceptions by the defense?
Sacks and interceptions, it's going to be sacks and interceptions easily. I mean, look, last year Notre Dame's was not a great sack team. Like they had 40 on the year. At the end of the year, they ranked 14th in college football in total sacks, but let's just go sacks per game. They were 54th at 2.2 per game. If they only have 5 interceptions, I don't know that the running backs are going to be anywhere close to what they are in sacks and interceptions. Like last year, Notre Dame's running backs were pretty good at generating touchdowns. You had 17 touchdowns for Jeremiah Love, 7 for Jadarian Price, that's 24. You had 26 with 2 from Neas. You had 1 from Kedron, that's 27. 24, 20, 27. And then you had 2 receiving touchdowns or 3? Yeah, the 2 by Jeremiah Love.
Jeremiah Love had 2.
So you had 29 touchdowns last year, and that was a great year. You're still 11 short of where this team was last year in sacks. So definitely the defensive number. Now, if you were to say touchdowns and if you were to say total touchdowns by the backs and receivers, now we're getting into a closer area, because then you take out tight ends and quarterback runs and things like that. Maybe we're getting a little bit closer. So, yeah. But Notre Dame had 27 touchdowns last year, total touchdowns. If they had the same number of sacks last year, Notre Dame would have ranked 56th in sacks. And that was a pretty darn good year for the running backs. All right.
Andre Tonsa, with a buy-sell hold, the number 1 team in the country by the end of the year will have at least 2 losses.
I'm assuming here that Andre's talking about end of the regular season, not end of the. I guess, Andre, if you're still in, I kind of would need to know the answer to that. Are you talking about end of the regular season, meaning there's just chaos, or are you talking about end of the whole season, meaning the champion? Because if it's the champion, then that's a potential buy, because we're coming off of a year where the national champion did have 2 losses. That's certainly possible. And I wouldn't say likely, but good chance of that happening. If we're talking about the number 1 team in the country is the number 1 seed in the playoffs, that's highly unlikely. Highly unlikely. Because Georgia wasn't close to being the number 1 seed. I mean, they were number 2 because of the way that it worked out. But in a pure seeding standpoint, being the number 1 seed, meaning you're the number 1 ranked team at the end of the year, I think it's highly unlikely. It was more likely last year than it would have been this year, because we did predict some chaos last year. This year, I think it's going to be more so. You're going to have at least 3 or 4 teams with 0 or 1 losses at the end of the regular season, going into the playoffs. So that would be my answer. If we're talking about end of the whole season, it's definitely possible, much more possible than being the number 1 ranked team at the end of the, going into the playoffs. What say you, Trevor?
Well, I took that as the number 1 team in the country, now, going off the coaches poll. So I was thinking a Texas will have at least 2 losses. Yeah. So I'm gonna buy that.
There's a third way to look at it, Trev.
Yep. So I'm gonna buy that as going into the playoffs. I think the number 1 team in the country today, which is Texas, from the coaches poll, because that's really the only poll that's came out so far. I'm gonna buy that. I think going into the playoffs, I'll have 2, but that also includes conference championships. it's going into the playoffs.
So you're saying Texas is going to have 2 or more losses going into the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bold take that I don't necessarily disagree with, Trevor. We're going to have more to say about that next week, but yes, it's a good take. That's more interesting too to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Well done, my friend. Well done.
Thank you, sir. Jim Halloran, what are your thoughts on automatic qualifiers for the college football playoffs, i.e. 4 for the SEC and Big Ten, and then 2 and 2 for the ACC and the Big 12?
I hate it. I think it's stupid. I think it's only about money. I think that if there's 4 teams in the SEC deserving of a playoff bid, then give them 4. If there's only 2, then give them 2. If there's 6, give them 6. But the problem is, let's say there's a year where there are 7 teams from the SEC that deserve a playoff spot. They are 7 of the 16 best teams in the country are from the SEC. Then they should get 7. It's almost impossible for them to get 7 now. You'd need Notre Dame to not be good and just no other league to go beyond 2. It's silly. It's all about money. It's all about revenue. We want to guarantee that we're going to get at least 4 playoff paychecks. That's what they're trying to do. That's all it is. There's a reason why coaches in the SEC are like, no, we don't want that. Like they understand kind of how this thing works. I think it's ridiculous. It's a money-driven, just absolutely ridiculous concept that I just think should go away. Sadly, I don't think it will, but I think it should. It should never be something that gets adopted. 12 of 16 playoff, actually it'd be 13 of the 16 playoff berths are going to just be decided by where you finish ranked in your league. That's ridiculous. In years where there's leagues are 16 to 18 teams with incredibly unbalanced schedules, this would have actually not been that bad if they would have had a 12, 16 team playoff, let's say 15 years ago. This wouldn't have been that bad of a thing. I wouldn't have liked it, but it wouldn't have been as bad because you got a pretty good idea of who the top 4 Big Ten teams are. But there's also been years where the 4th place Big Ten team had no business being in the college football playoff. Relatively recently, that's been true. I mean, have we seen before the expansion, did we see some of the teams that Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State had to play in the Big Ten title games? Those teams all would have been in the top 4 in the league. So it's stupid, Jim. I hate it. I hate it, hate it, hate it, hate it, hate it. Real quick, Indy Noah says, what are both of your expectations for this season? And what should the Indy fan base expect record-wise? We're going to do a show next Saturday about that, Noah, so we'll hang on to that. But what I will say is something that Trevor and I have talked about before. The expectation is that Notre Dame should, at the very least, the very minimum of expectations is either getting a bye in the first round or winning at least a game in the postseason. That should be the minimum expectation for this team. And I mean floor of what. Now, that doesn't mean it's the floor of what the team is capable of. They're capable of not being in the playoffs. But as far as saying this is what should be expected based on your schedule, based on your talent, based on your experience, based on your coaching, the minimum of what I'll consider we even talking about a successful season is getting to the quarterfinals, either by getting a bye or by winning a game in the first round. That's the minimum of expectations. What's the ceiling of expectations? It's winning a championship. And not saying that in that's always the expectation of Notre Dame. But no, this team is actually capable of that. The expectation for Brian Kelly in 2010 at Notre Dame, big picture, was win a championship. That's always the expectation at Notre Dame. Nobody thought that team was actually capable of winning one because this is year one. You had some roster holes. I mean, it'd be unfair to ask that team to say, well, you didn't win a championship, failure. No, that team wasn't capable of doing that in 2010. If Brian Kelly did the best coaching job in America in 2010, which he did not do, that team's not winning a championship or even playing for a championship.
No.
Where Notre Dame was in 2010 compared to where Auburn and Oregon were, for example, who played for the title, light years different. So why would I expect him to do that? This team is different because this team is actually capable. It's like looking at the 2018 Notre Dame team and the 2010 Notre Dame team. The expectation when you're at Notre Dame was the same both years, but one team had the capability of it, the other one didn't. So if you want to use 2 Brian Kelly teams, I think that's 15, 18, those teams were capable of winning it all. 10, no. 11 was. I don't care what anybody says. That team, when you look at all the players that team had, that team should have been a lot better than it was. But alas, it was not. But that's the answer to that. But as far as record, Noah, tune in next Saturday, 1:00. We'll have more for you on that one. Let's see here. Get a couple more before we get out of here. Trev, we've got one from, here we go, from Coleman
Smith. Is this the most wide open college football has ever been? Most of the contenders outside of Penn State are all breaking in new quarterbacks.
From an era standpoint, yes. I don't know if this season is the most wide open. I would argue that I think last year was even more wide open than this year is. But in this era of the last couple seasons and then this season, I certainly think it's the most open it's been. I would even say that the last year, the 14 playoff was pretty wide open.
Oh, yeah, in 23?
Yeah. I mean,
Agreed.
Georgia didn't make the playoff. They had a shot. Florida State was a team that, if they were healthy, could have maybe gotten in and done some damage because there was no elite teams. That's really what it boils down to, Coleman. It's not that there's a lot of good teams. That's been true in a lot of years. It's just 2018, there was actually a lot of good teams in college football in 2018. There just was one team that, that was kind of just better than everybody else, just way better than everybody else. So it wasn't as open. There was only a couple teams that maybe could beat Clemson. And they beat both of them, ironically, in the playoffs.
Yeah.
I thought the only 2 teams capable of beating Clemson that year, once they got rolling, was Notre Dame and Alabama. And Notre Dame beat them, or Clemson beat them by 27 and 28. I mean, 2019, it just, once we found out who LSU was, there was nobody going to beat them that year. They played terrible against Auburn and terrible on defense in the second half against Alabama and still beat both of them. And that team was just different. There isn't that type of team this year. That's what truly makes it wide open to me. Mm-hmm. And then when you combine that with more depth of talent for teams, I think that makes it even more wide open.
Yep. And also just the fact that there's no 2 teams, because I think back to 2015 and 2016. You kind of look at the season as a whole, and it's like, it's probably going to be Alabama and Clemson. You go back and think about it. There were some teams like in 2015, like Notre Dame had an opportunity to, maybe Ohio State had that opportunity to, but I think far and away, you kind of look at Alabama and Clemson, it's like, those will probably be the 2 teams. But outside of those years, and then 18 Clemson, I mean, really from 18 to 21, it was kind of up in the air of who it was going to be, which I found interesting. But yeah, I'm with you.
I want to push back on a couple of things. My guy Archer, who's a Big Ten fan and love Archer, but he says, all I want is that there be required number of Power 4 games to qualify for the college football playoff. If everyone is playing at least a certain minimum number, I'm good with 0 automatic bids. And then he says 12 Big Ten teams will play 10 Power 4 games this year. Only 3 SEC teams will play 10 Power 4 games this year. And he says, if we all agree to only play 9 Power 4 games, we can all get a cupcake FCS, that team next to the last game of the season. Cool. We need to have similar structure. See, this is where I think that this misses the mark entirely, because you're assuming that equal numbers equals equal quality. And that's impossible. You can look at 2 Big Ten teams that play 9 conference games and a 10th non-conference game and say those 2 schedules look nothing alike. Nothing alike. Because you're in an 18-team league. So I can look at a Penn State schedule and look at a Wisconsin schedule and say, okay, they're both playing 10 non-conference games, 10 Power 4 games, right? Aren't they both doing that? So I believe Penn State plays West Virginia out of the conference, right? And I believe that West Virginia plays Alabama out of the conference. So we're talking about 2 Big Ten teams that both play 9 conference games, and they both play, I believe, 1 Power 4 team out of conference. Their schedules look – actually, I was wrong. Penn State does not play. I was just about to say
Penn State doesn't.
Yeah. Let's pretend that Penn State has last year's schedule where they did play a team out of conference. They play West Virginia. And then you look at Wisconsin's schedule this year where they play Alabama, but they also play at Michigan, home against Ohio State, at Oregon, home against Washington, at Indiana, home against Illinois, at Minnesota. That is very, very different. Very, 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 very different than Penn State playing Ohio State at home, Washington at home, at USC, at Minnesota. Very different schedules. So if you're going to say, well, I'm trying to say we need to have some level of equality, we're playing X number of schools, I would argue that there are teams in the SEC that play 8 games against Power 4 teams that could play no Power 4 teams out of conference that are going to have a tougher schedule than some of the Big Ten teams. Just like there are some teams in the Big Ten that could, like if Wisconsin did not have Alabama on their schedule, this would still be a crazy schedule. Like take Bama out and replace them with what's a Power 4 team that stinks? Let's replace them with Virginia. Let's go Cal. Let's go real bad. Let's go Stanford.
Yeah.
Reviewed, right? Stanford. They still would have at Michigan, Iowa at home, Ohio State at home, at Oregon, home against Washington, at Indiana, home against Illinois, at Minnesota. That's a ridiculous schedule that is off-centered from what another Big Ten team is going to play. It could also be tougher than what some SEC teams are going to play if they played 9 conference games plus an out in a conference Power 4. Because you could say, okay, well, you got to play these games, but you can't control how tough a schedule is going to be when a league is so big. So to say, well, we mandate that you've got to play the same 9 games as us. Why? Because your teams play and I think the problem that Archer has is that he looks at this from an Ohio State standpoint. Ohio State schedules very differently than almost everybody else in the Big Ten. They have to play Michigan every year. They get Penn State every year. Last year they had Oregon, and they always schedule tough out of conference. In recent years, over the last decade, Ohio State's played, they've played Virginia Tech out of conference. They've played Texas out of conference. They've played Notre Dame out of conference. They've played, Oklahoma out of conference. 9 out of 10 years, Ohio State's going to have a very tough game out of conference. So, yeah, it's going to be different. But then we look at Michigan's schedule in 2023. It's a joke. They played 2 good games, and then they missed a bunch of other good teams in their league. So this notion of, well, it's all equal if we all play the same number of games has nothing to do with equality of a schedule. Because there are going to be years where forcing the SEC to play 9 conference games and another Power 4 gives them significantly harder schedules than what a lot of the Big Ten are going to play. The Big Ten, by and large, is still a very top-heavy league. With all due respect, the middle-of-the-road teams in the SEC this year are going to be significantly better than Power 4 teams in the Big Ten. It just is. So he's saying, well, same number of Power 4 games. I don't care about that. Because there are years you could play 10 Power 4 games and you've got 2 tough games the whole year. How does that make it better than another team plays 8 and they play some cupcakes out of conference, but they play 7 of the 9 best teams in the SEC? Or 7 of the best 9 teams in the Big Ten, like Wisconsin does this year. Wisconsin could play it. Let's say that you dropped their Alabama and let's say their softest Maryland. You get them down to 8 games. I still would say Michigan, Iowa, Ohio State, Oregon, Washington, Indiana, Illinois, and Minnesota is a brutal schedule for most teams. If Ohio State had that schedule, and let's say you trade out Ohio State for Penn State, and they've got to play Michigan on the road, Iowa, at Penn State, or home against Penn State, at Oregon, home against Washington, at Indiana, home against Illinois, at Minnesota, that'd be a very tough schedule for Ohio State. Given Penn State's schedule, and it's not as tough. So this notion that you can, that in a league with 70 teams, basically, you can somehow make things more equal or to evaluate because you make them play the same number of games doesn't do what you think it does. It doesn't. If you think the Big Ten has the same depth of the SEC, that's rarely been true in the last 15 years. Rarely been true. And the only reason it's true now is because you went and added Oregon, Washington, and USC and UCLA. So I think this notion of making them play the same number of games is just, to me, kind of like, Archer, I know what you're saying. You're saying a same standard of scheduling, and I'm telling you that's nonsense. Because, again, how can you say the same standard of scheduling? Because it's the same number of Power 4 teams. I'm telling you that's BS. That doesn't do anything. In a league with 70 teams, in a division, FBS, like Power 5, with about 65 to 70 teams, you can't get a similar standard. Because you can say, okay, well, you have to play X number of teams that were over 500 last year. Well, because they were over 500 last year doesn't mean they're going to be over 500 this year. You have to play 10 Power 4 teams. All right, cool. So we're going to schedule Cal and Stanford out of conference, while Ohio State has to go to Texas. How is that going to be the same? So if you created that standard, let's say, and Georgia gets a year like they had in 2023. So Georgia gets the schedule. Let's pull up Georgia's schedule from 2023. Now, again, I'm not hammering Georgia because we've talked about this. The Oklahoma game got canceled, blah, 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 blah. But in 2023, Georgia had a very soft schedule. They had to, in their league play, they had to play No, I'm sorry, that's Wisconsin. I thought I went to Georgia. Come on, guys. Give me Georgia. I don't want Wisconsin. Give me a second. I'm like, I don't remember Georgia playing Purdue in 2023. I know their schedule was soft. I didn't think it was that soft. All right, 2023 Georgia schedule in their league. They played South Carolina that season, who in South Carolina that year was not very good. They were, let's see, 5-7. They had to play Auburn, who wasn't very good that year. Auburn went 6-7. They had to play Kentucky that year, who wasn't very good. Kentucky went 7-6. They played Vanderbilt on the road that year. Vanderbilt was 2-10. They had to play Florida that year. Florida wasn't very good. Florida went, let's see here. Florida went 5-7. Missouri was 11-2. It's the one good team they played. Ole Miss was 11-2. Tennessee 9-4. And not a very good 9-4. So you look at that schedule and you say, okay, then they're going to go play Cal and Stanford non-conference because they got to play 10 Power 4 games. You're going to tell me that in any way, shape, form, or fashion stacks up to what Ohio State's schedule is going to be this year? In any way, shape, form, or fashion, is that a similar standard to what they're going to play? No, because what you're going to see is teams are going to say, there are Power 4 teams that are going to be easier games than playing a good group of 5 team. Notre Dame's softest game last year, 2 easiest opponents last year, were Power 4 teams, Stanford and Purdue. A MAC team beat Notre Dame. They annihilated the 2 Big Ten teams. The Big Ten team they played last year and one of the ACC teams they played last year. So getting a set standard in no way, shape, form, or fashion creates any sort of equality from a scheduling standpoint. And if they went to that, you'd still find something to complain about because of the imbalance of the schedules. Evaluate how dominant a team is against their schedule. And if you have a softer schedule, you better win by way more than the team with the tougher schedule. I'm going to hold Penn State to a you better blow people out standard that's going to be much greater than what I'm holding Georgia and LSU to. Fact. I'm going to hold them to a much tougher standard than I'm holding Ohio State to. Your dominance, it's not just about winning and losing. You better blow these teams out because they are not good. Where with Ohio State, Georgia, LSU, Wisconsin, it's survive in advance, baby. 8 out of 12 weeks. Survive in advance with that schedule. I would say that's true for Notre Dame in October, November. I don't want to see Notre Dame just winning. I want to see Notre Dame winning convincingly as I'm evaluating them compared to what Georgia's going to be doing against that schedule or LSU against that schedule. Go ahead, Trev. I know you want to say something.
To put some numbers behind what you're talking about, how much the number of teams in like the Big Ten are, for example, how much that affects it. Here's some numbers. In the SEC, Georgia, Bama, and Texas play 9 opponents that they also played last year, Power 4 teams. Oregon plays 4, Penn State plays 3, Ohio State plays 4. And it's just because of how big the conferences are. So, like, Archer, I get what you're saying of, like, if it's 10 Power 4 teams, then, like, in theory, it should be equivalent. But no, Brian is talking about how it's like, look, The reason why it can't be is when you have a league with 18 teams, you're not going to play the same people year over year.
There's no uniformity of standard.
Like it's tough. Like there's this idea that in the Big Ten, if you schedule like 9 Big Ten opponents, then every single year your schedule is at Penn State, at Ohio State, home against Michigan, home against Oregon, at USC in the Coliseum, at Nebraska, that's just not how it shakes out because the conference is so big. Because then you're also going to have years where you're, home against Iowa, on the road against Rutgers, home against Northwestern. Like you're going to have those years too. And it's just impossible to set that standard. Well, as long as you just play 9. Because Archer, to counter your point, you're like, well, what would you do if, if Georgia scheduled what IU scheduled last year and then got in the playoffs? It's like, but the point is IU was playing IU schedule last year. There's nothing preventing.
But the point is, Trevor, is you also can't know what teams are going to be from year to year. Preseason, you'd have looked at Indiana's schedule and said, that's a brutal schedule. You got to play the preseason number 1 team and the 2 teams that played for the championship last year, in Michigan and Washington. On paper, that looked rough. And it turned out not to be. So, and here's the thing I would say is, if you want to change it, then look, there's no reason for Big Ten teams to play 9 games anymore. Go to 8. And like what I would say is, what I would like to see is, which I think could somewhat give us some level of an evaluation. Because all this is just crying from the Big Ten and the SEC about, oh, it's not fair. They don't have to play what we play, blah, 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 blah. That's true for Georgia. It wasn't true for Texas. It wasn't true for other teams in the league. I mean, Oklahoma had to play a far tougher schedule than Tennessee did last year, in my opinion. But it's this. It's like, okay, so let's go to 8 games and let's play some conference round robins. And every year it's different. And we're going to basically go off of last year's schedules. So number 1 SEC plays last year's number 1 in the Big Ten week 2. Number 2 plays number 2. You're going to get some years where last year's number 1's not as good, right? Well, man, I got the ACC number 1 from last year, and they ended up being garbage. Exactly. It's going to happen from time to time. If you want to do something like that, sure, then we have some way of evaluating. But the problem is when you force teams to go out of their league, they're going to go schedule somebody that's not good. They're going to go schedule Purdue and say, well, if you have to, why are we assuming that Power 4 teams are always better than Group of 5 teams? Look at Notre Dame last year. 3 of the toughest games they played last year, rankings-wise or how the game played out, were Group of 5 teams. Northern Illinois beat them. And then Army and Navy were both ranked. How are those easier games than playing Purdue or Stanford last season, who were terrible? Miami of Ohio was better than those 2 teams. So again, there's no way to create uniformity other than to just feel better and say, well, they played 10 Power 4s and we played 10 Power 4s. If that happened, I promise you the same people complaining about the number of games now are going to then be complaining about the imbalance of the schedules from year to year. That's just the reality of it. You can't find a perfect solution to this. That's why you have to properly evaluate strength of schedule, but you also have to have the ability to look at how teams play. Because there are biases in strength of schedule. Because you just assume it's an SEC schedule, so you get a bump. I saw one metric that had like 8 of the top 10 toughest schedules were SEC teams. That's nonsense. Nonsense. But the metrics that go into it are, to me, flawed. You have to be able, and this is where the subjective comes from. This is why I'm completely against using computers. Sometimes you can just look at a team play and say, that team's better than that team. I watched this team beat a team that's okay, and I watched this team play a pretty good team, and I'm just telling you, this team that blew out the okay team is better than this team that won that really tough game against that really good team. You have to be able to evaluate it that way. But in this era of 16 to 18 leagues, and it's only going to get bigger, they're not going to get smaller, it's impossible to have any sort of uniformity of standard of, because just saying play 10 Power 4 games is, I would rather a team go play Memphis or Navy or Army or Toledo than Purdue out of conference or Stanford out of conference. Because that's what teams are going to do, is they're just going to start trying to play some bad teams. Teams that are already doing that. Ohio State's not going to do that because they don't have to play Texas. They don't have to schedule Notre Dame. They don't have to schedule Georgia. They don't have to schedule Oklahoma. But they understand that that's a key ingredient to building a championship caliber team, is having those tests. Ohio State got nothing out of playing Virginia Tech in 2014. Nothing. As far as, oh, we're not going to get tested if we don't play Virginia Tech. But they still did it because why? It's team building. Well, they took an L that game, and that made them a better football team. And by the end of the year, who's holding up the national championship trophy? It's Ohio State. So this notion of the number of league games you play, it's nonsense from both sides. The Big Ten, well, the SEC, well, our 8 games are tougher than your 9. Sometimes it is for LSU. It is for Georgia. It's not true for Ole Miss. So, no, it's not true. Our 9 games are tougher than your 8. Well, sometimes that's true. It's true for Wisconsin. It's not true for Penn State. And that's the point, is it's just impossible. It's impossible in a 70-team, 65 to 70-team league, which is essentially what Power 5 is. It's impossible for anyone to be complaining about uniformity of schedule. It's impossible. So then when the SEC just goes and schedules a bunch of ACC teams that suck, what are you going to say then? They did what you asked them to do. They went and scheduled 10 games, but now you're not happy because they didn't play any good teams. So, that's my issue with it. That's my issue with it. It's just I'm so tired of hearing the complaining and the crying about uniformity of schedules. Like, look, you guys have started all this crap. So I don't want to hear anything about uniformity, because it used to be, I used to respect the Big Ten when, like, you played 9 games in your league, you played all but one team in your league. You had a pretty good idea of who the better teams were in that league. Pretty good idea. But then you went to 12, 14, and that, forget that. Let the Pac-12 come back. How about you guys do that? Let the Big East come back. Then we can start talking about, uniformity of schedule. Then, like, in those type of scenarios, Trevor, I'd be more open to some level of mandating things, because now there's more balance within the conferences. But these giant super conferences, which we have now, it's useless to talk about it. Evaluate them for the schedule they play. And if a team plays a bad schedule, then you evaluate them, just like they did with Indiana last year. You know what? Indiana beat a lot of Oklahomas and Vanderbilts last year. Alabama didn't. It's as simple as that. If you just don't lose to a sucky Oklahoma team or a sucky or an average Vanderbilt team, you're in the playoffs. Hey, Ole Miss, if you want to, don't cry about not making them. Beat a 4-8 Kentucky team at home and you're in the playoffs. Even with the loss to Florida they're in, if they would have beat a 4-8 Kentucky team at home. That's what knocked him out. So I don't want to hear you crying about that. I don't want to hear these Big Ten teams crying when Penn State refuses to play an out-of-conference Power 5 team. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it when Michigan does what they did. I don't want to hear it. I don't hear about, we got to play 9 conference games. So half your league sucks. Why was Indiana able to go so well against a 9-game? Everybody complains about Indiana's schedule. They played 9 Big Ten teams. They only played 1 good team all year. Well, that means you just admitted half your league sucks. You just admitted half your league sucks when you talk about Indiana's schedule. They played almost half the league last year. So that's where I'm at. I think it's a waste of time. To this uniformity of schedule, because there's no such thing in a league with 65 to 70 teams. Not when they're broken into 4 conferences. It's impossible. It's impossible. If you want to fix it, encourage your teams to schedule tougher. Schedule, like, do what they do in basketball. I would love to see a rotating of the 4 big conferences. We're going to rotate a Big Ten versus SEC one year. And it's Big Ten versus ACC the next year, Big Ten versus Big 12 the next year. And you try to some way match comparable teams from what they've been. You could even do something like, let's take the aggregate of what teams have been the last 3 years and do them that way, as opposed to just last year. And so, like, okay, last 3 years, the best record in the big SEC is Georgia, and the last 3 years, the best record in the Big Ten is Ohio State. So we're going to play them against each other. Or you could do something like, hey, R1 plays your 4, R2 plays your 3, and then R5 plays your 9. You could do a lot of fun stuff with it. But that would maybe be something I could live with if it was more structured that way, to where teams don't have the say in who they play. I could maybe get with you on that. If you did things to where you look at the aggregate of records and that's how you come, like, so you don't schedule your league like 12 years in advance, take more of an NFL approach where your schedules are made every year uniquely in an attempt to say, hey, look, we're going to try to create some balance. Maybe you could do that. But even then, teams change over so much from one year to the next, that you'd have given some teams Florida State thinking we're going to give them a tougher schedule, and Florida State sucks, goes 2-10. You're after going 13-1. You give it a Big Ten thing. We're going to give it Michigan State because we're going to make them play the defending, what were they, the Big Ten runners up in 2021, or they finished third, something like that. Who won the Big Ten? It was Michigan won it in 2021, right? Michigan State was basically the second best team in the league, second or third best team in the league. Well, and then the next year they do what? They go 3-9. So it's impossible to create any sort of balance in scheduling. It's impossible to create any sort of uniformity of scheduling because the leagues are so different from each other and then from year to year. But that's the only way I could get behind it, Trevor, is I would say you can't play more than 8. Why is nobody bitching about the ACC playing only 8 conference games? Because the ACC sucks. They don't care how many conference games they play. Doesn't matter. But it's a problem for the SEC. So anyway, everybody goes to 8 games. You got to play 4 non-conference games, and then you play a team from another conference in a format that's scheduled by the conferences. Formulas by the conferences. You can't schedule your own. Maybe we could then talk. But what's going to happen is you're going to have people like James Franklin saying, fine, we'll go play a Power 4 team every year. Hey, Stanford, what do you guys think about creating a little 6-year stretch of games? Or hey, Kansas, you guys suck again. Would you guys like to come to Happy Valley next year? That'd be great. That's what's going to happen. While Ohio State's still playing Texas and Georgia and Alabama, Notre Dame and Oklahoma. Penn State's going to go play, the soft teams that they're scheduling. That's what's going to happen. So it doesn't seem to fix anything. But I think that's a great way to end the show, Trev. What do you think? Do we get any
super Beefeater super chat? Yeah. Super chat from Beefeater ND08. Appreciate the super chat. What if college football had a farm system like baseball has? Schools aligned vertically and separated into leagues and divisions? Just a thought from a brain dead hombre.
Well, you're not brain dead if you're coming up with something that complex. I think that's I don't like it. I don't think it works. But I think it's you're thinking outside the box in a way to try to change the system. Like Boise State loses their players to Notre Dame, and so then they go get their players from their farm system, which is some, FCS league where they take who knows? But it would be kind of impossible to do that.
Yeah.
It would be very, very difficult to do that.
Yeah, that'd be tough.
I get where I think he's coming from a place of he wants to try to create some sort of like structure. Look, this is the farm team. You're going to lose your best players to this team every year, but then you get to go take somebody else's, and it's kind of how it works in Major League Baseball, right? I mean, if you're a good farm system, then Louisville Bats lose a guy to the Reds. They know they're going to be okay because they're getting a guy from Daytona who was killing it last year to replace him.
Yeah.
It wouldn't work in this instance. NFL has a farm system. It's called college football. The best part about that is, and same thing with college basketball or NBA, although the NBA's got a little bit more of somewhat of a minor league system now. The G League is kind of a minor league system. Well, it is a minor league system, but it's a little different than like the other the Major League Baseball minor leagues. But yeah, that's where it's at. So that's fun discussion. That gets me fired up. The whole scheduling thing, because they're both wrong.
Yep.
And how they're going about this. They're both wrong in how they're going about it. And it gets frustrating. It just really frustrating. But it is what it is. But you know how long teams have been complaining about other team schedules since I've been a college football fan. I mean, they used to complain about that with Florida State back in the day, remember? They complained about that with Clemson when Clemson was dominant. Well, they played a soft schedule. Yeah, they went out and played Georgia and beat them. They went out and played Auburn, Texas A&M, and guess what they did to you in the postseason? You know, like, it's been going on forever. And it'll continue to go on. No matter what changes you make, there'll still be people complaining and crying about imbalance of schedules because it's impossible to do. It's same things happen in the NFL, who tries to create parity with the scheduling. It still comes out, and it's like, well, that team got a break, and that team. Why is this team that went 2-14 last year getting that schedule? It's same thing we'll complain about. That's it.
Agreed. We do have another super chat in there as well.
We got another one? Michael S. All right.
Thank you for the super chat, Michael. Are you surprised Carr has not gone out and grabbed the starting position by now?
A, you don't know that he hasn't. And B, no, I'm not. We're not even to the first scrimmage. If CJ Carr had won the starting job this quickly, it would say more about Kenny Minchey than it would CJ Carr.
Mm-hmm.
It would mean Kenny Minchey just folded. Like, you realize these are both really talented players, right? So basically the only thing we could take is they don't both suck, or one of them's not sucking. They're battling. I didn't expect it to happen this quickly. I think before the season started, we said, you hope that it happens that quickly, but it's most likely going to happen by the middle of camp. We just literally just finished the first week of practice. So no, I'm not surprised. Because I think highly of Kenny Minchey also. I've said it 1,000 times. I think CJ Carr is a better quarterback. I think CJ Carr is going to start. All the sources I have think CJ Carr is going to start. But I've also said Kenny Minchey's also very talented and has a chance to beat CJ Carr out. And CJ's got to win the job. He's not being anointed. He's got to win the job. Did you expect Kenny Minchey just roll over and die and let CJ Carr beat him out? What was your expectation? Or was it that I thought, if you thought CJ Carr is so good, he's going to win the job after a week, I'm okay, that's fine. I think it's a little bit unfair of a redshirt freshman battling against an older player. Also, Kenny Minchey is older than CJ. He's been in the program longer. I think they're both battling their tails off. I'm good. They're going to make mistakes in week one. They're both in this situation for the first time. Kenny wasn't in the quarterback battle last year. Neither was CJ. So, yeah, guess what? They're going to make mistakes against one of the best defenses in college football in the first week of camp. That's expected. Let's see how we get out of this weekend after they get out of that first scrimmage, and then let's see if there's any separation. But if there's not separation, it says a lot more about Kenny Minchey than it does something negative about CJ Carr, in my opinion. There you go.
Well, good deal, folks. That's going to do it for us here today on the Irish
Do you have anything
Breakdown.
to add to that, Trev? Like, I kind of went off on some tangents, but do you have anything else to add to that quarterback thing? Am I overreacting to this? I don't know. It's just, I'm frustrated by it. I knew I shouldn't be, because I should have known it was going to happen. I should have known it was going to happen, but I'm still surprised. I shouldn't be.
No, I'm trying to think of how to say this. No, you're not overreacting. The overreactions to this have been pretty ridiculous, if you ask me. I don't really know what people were expecting to see from a quarterback battle between a redshirt sophomore and a redshirt freshman, but it wasn't going to get decided in 24 hours. I don't know if people just assumed that once Steve Angeli entered the transfer portal, then Notre Dame just had their quarterback for the next 3 years, or what. That gets frustrating to me. The lack of access is frustrating. It's not the quarterback's fault. That is what it is. Right. But it's all of the random storylines that get branched out from it. And then people looking way too into I saw the body language of this quarterback in the interview, and I think that means that this quarterback feels like that he may be behind. And it's like, look, that's the aspect of it that I'm getting tired of. Because it's the same questions that we have to continue answering every week. Is this quarterback actually in this good of a spot? It's like, yes, they are. They both are. They're not going to name a quarterback the first day of fall camp. Just not. And I think that's the thing that really gets frustrating to continue to have to keep answering. But the reason why we have to keep answering it is because there's so many just random BS articles that get thrown out there of, well, this is what we saw in our takeaway of camp today. Because of this, we think that if CJ's not stretching with the team, that maybe he feels like that he could, like, I don't blame people for asking the questions, but that's where I continually get frustrated.
I love this by Jason Smith because he's being sarcastic, but it's like, I heard CJ tied his left shoe first today, and he always ties his right first, must be off his game. Like, honestly, the absurdity of your statement is it's funny because there's like some truth to that, which is hilarious.
Yep.
Was it a double knot? Like, I mean, this is where we're at. Like, we've seen one full practice and they didn't have pads on. Take a deep breath. Take a deep breath. Even if we were to say, I grant the premise that they're both struggling in the first week. All right. What do I say every year? Offense is always behind the defense in the first week. And it just so happens that the defense they're going against is one of the best defenses in college football. You think that might have something to do with it?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Day in and day out, Kenny and CJ are going up against the best secondary that they're going to face all year, including the postseason.
Without a doubt. Especially regular season.
They're not going to come out and
look pretty decent too, Trev.
Yeah. They're not going to come out and look like Pat Mahomes on day one of fall camp.
If they would, I'd be real concerned about this team. Real concerned. But that's what I love. It's like Tay Johnson makes these great interception and nobody's talking about that. It's just the quarterbacks struggle. So it's hilarious. He accidentally wore his church socks to practice. Start Minchie. I mean, these things are all absurd, and I love that you guys are putting these in there, but it's like that's kind of where it's at. Like, let's spend a week talking about whether or not it's okay for CJ Carr to go throw during part of stretch. Like, what is the purpose of stretch? To get loose and prepared for practice? What's the most important body part that needs to get loosened up for a quarterback? It's all the ones attached to his arm. Come on. It's also a guy who is coming off of an elbow injury that was a problem last year. So it's wild.
But that makes sense, Brian.
I know.
That's the issue.
It doesn't get clicks.
Well, that is going to do
That'll
it
do it
for us today on the Irish Breakdown podcast. On your way out of here, folks, please be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family. But as always, the best way to support what we do here, subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So for Brian, I'm Trevor. Have a fun and safe weekend, everybody. We'll see you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown podcast.